Morning. The Committee on Oversight and Government Reform will come to order, and without objection, the Chair is authorized to declare a recess at any time. We're here today to talk about some alarming problems at our country's premier law enforcement agencies. The latest report from the Department of Justice Inspector General outlines a number of problems with the conduct of both law enforcement officers and the agencies that manage them. That report outlined a number of key problems. First, law enforcement personnel at home and abroad engaged in reprehensible sexual harassment and misconduct that jeopardized our national security. Second, the agencies where they work mishandled their responses to those incidents by failing to properly report them, leading to insufficient punishment. And third, the FBI and the DEA tried to hide these incidents from the Inspector General by improperly withholding information and encouraging employees not to cooperate with the Inspector General. Hiding information from the Inspector General is simply and totally unacceptable. The Department of Justice Inspector General report documents a number of highly concerning findings about Federal law enforcement. One of the most shocking incidents Mr. Horowitz described in his report involved DEA agents in Colombia partying with prostitutes paid for by drug cartels. While the DEA agents were spending time with those prostitutes, local Colombian police were watching the agents' guns and property. The fact that this happened was bad enough. But none of these agents were really even punished by the DEA. Most of the agents involved were suspended for a few days and allowed to return to work with their security clearances in full. Based on the testimony we have read from the DEA administrator, she says she doesn't have the power to simply fire these people. I don't buy it. The American public doesn't buy it. And for the thousands of men and women who serve honorably, they're patriotic, they work hard, they put their lives on the line, this administration, this DEA administrator, has got to hold those people accountable and get them out of there. If this is the kind of behavior that they're going to engage in, it's totally unacceptable. They should not have a security clearance, and they should be fired. Some of these agencies compromised our national security and then essentially got a vacation. The punishment for engaging in this type of behavior was 2 to 10 days off paid leave, or non-paid leave. That sounds like a vacation to me. It doesn't sound like punishment. To suggest that these people couldn't be fired or do something more severe is simply unacceptable. And again, I want to remind our members, this is a matter of national security. We're talking about people's lives. And the DEA, as much as anybody, puts people overseas in very tough and difficult situations. But when we have bad apples who repeatedly do the same type of behavior, compromise our national security, then they need to lose their national security clearances and they need to be fired. The IG report found that this was hardly an isolated incident. The report highlights repeated abuses of sexual misconduct, including unreported cases of ATF training instructors sleeping with their students, using government vehicles to facilitate inappropriate sexual relationships, and managers sexually harassing employees and asking them to watch pornography. The report also makes clear that when law enforcement agents engage in inappropriate and illicit sexual behavior, the agency they work for oftentimes just simply looks the other way. To use the IG's language, these cases of sexual misconduct are treated as, quote, local management issues, end quote. In other words, they're basically swept under the rug. Adding to the concerns raised in this report is the fact that the DEA and the FBI tried to hide these incidents from their own Inspector General. Both the DEA and the FBI went out of their way to impede and delay the Inspector General's report. According to the report, the DEA and the FBI delayed responding to requests for information, provided heavily redacted documents, and even told their employees not to cooperate. For example, the Inspector General asked the DEA to run more than 40 search terms to search their database and identify relevant information. The 3 terms, 3 out of the more than 40 that they ran included sex, prosty, and exposure. Not included were brothel, escort, harass, rape, solicit, and the list goes on. Why exclude? Why exclude the search terms that the Inspector General is asking for? It's not the DEA's responsibility to weed that out. Your job is to allow the Inspector General to get in there and get his fingernails dirty and go figure out the truth. But that's not what happened. I want to put up a slide here. When the DEA finally did provide information after significant delay, in some cases, documents were so heavily redacted, the IG couldn't even tell what the documents are about. This is the type of documentation that the Inspector General was given by you at the DEA. And we want answers as to why that is. The good men and women who work at the Inspector General's office do tough, difficult work. But they can't do anything if they get that kind of material from the DEA. And it's not just the DEA, it's the FBI. It's the other agencies as well. It's not acceptable. We have a lot of questions for our witnesses who are here today to testify on both behalf of the DEA and the FBI. It's incumbent upon the leadership of these law enforcement agencies to weed out employees who put our security at risk, embarrass the country, and break the law. To the good men and women, the overwhelming majority of men and women who do their job in a patriotic, hard-working way, put their lives on the line, God bless you. We need you, we love you, we care for you. But it's also irresponsible of management to not deal with the bad apples. People are going to make mistakes, okay? But these weren't simple mistakes. This went on and on and on, multiple reports of sex parties, of loud parties, to the point that the landlord was actually complaining back to our government about how out of control our own federal employees were serving overseas. Again, the people who cause these problems, I recognize, are a small population, a small percentage of the total population who have not been held accountable for their dangerous lapses in judgment. I would ask unanimous consent. I'd like to enter two documents into the record. First of all is from our Attorney General, Eric Holder, on April 10th of this year, a prohibition on the solicitation of prostitution. How bad is it? One of his last acts as the Attorney General, Eric Holder, has to actually go forward and issue a memorandum explaining to people that you can't do this again. It's almost embarrassing that he has to do this. I appreciate that he did it to clarify if there's some misunderstanding out there, but I'd like to enter that into the record. I also want to enter into the record a document response. This is to the Assistant Inspector General for Evaluations and Inspections, the Office of Inspector General, to Nina, I'm going to slaughter her last name, Pelletier, I guess. And it's from Michael Dixon, who's the Acting Deputy Chief Inspector, Office of Inspection, saying that, I'm going to read this quote here from the very last line, DEA did a second review of the cases the OIG reviewed to determine if the Office of Professional Responsibility had appropriately and thoroughly investigated these allegations. It was found through the review that the investigations were investigated properly through DEA's disciplinary process for related misconduct. Basically telling the Inspector General that, yeah, we did everything we could, that it was properly investigated properly through DEA's disciplinary process. That's a sad day for the DEA. With that, I will now yield to the gentleman from Maryland, the ranking member, Mr. Cummings, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And set forth, Mr. Chairman, at the beginning of the Inspector General's report is a well-known doctrine for law enforcement officers. It simply says, and I quote, "Given the nature of their work, federal law enforcement employees are held to the highest standards of conduct and must be accountable for their actions both on and off duty." Although this tenet should be obvious, it bears repeating here today, and it bears repeating every day. The Inspector General's report details conduct that is simply deplorable for anyone, let alone law enforcement officials serving the United States of America. The report describes allegations that a Colombian police officer, and I quote, arranged sex parties end of quote, with prostitutes funded by the local drug cartels for these DEA agents at their government leased headquarters or quarters, end of quote. Although the Inspector General's report describes activities between 2005 and 2008, last night our committee obtained new documents showing that some of these allegations were made far earlier, and some date back as early as 2001. In response to the committee's request, the DEA has now produced to the committee 88 internal reports issued by its Office of Professional Responsibility. One of these reports in particular, case number 2012-0085, goes into great detail about these allegations. However, the agency has warned that releasing the entire report could, and I quote, expose complainants, witnesses, and victims, end of quote. So we must summarize its findings today. This new internal report details years of allegations, beginning in 2001, that portray DEA agents as completely out of control. They appear to have fraternized with cartel members, accepted lavish gifts, and paid for prostitutes with no concern whatsoever for the negative repercussions of security vulnerabilities they created. This new internal report describes not one or two isolated incidents, but literally dozens of parties with prostitutes in which DEA agents use government funds and government offices. Mr. Chairman, my staff prepared a summary of this new internal report, and I ask unanimous consent that it be included in the hearing record.
Without objection, so ordered.
This new internal report details a truly breathtaking recklessness by DEA agents who are sworn to protect our country. Today, I want to know how these egregious misconduct incidents could have continued for so long, for the better part of a decade, without being addressed. The head of this agency, Michelle Leonard, is here with us today. Given her extended tenure at DEA during the same time frame of these abuses, we will have very direct questions for her. The administrator was nominated by President Bush in 2003 to serve as Deputy Administrator of DEA. She began serving as acting administrator in 2007, and President Bush nominated her to serve as administrator in 2008. She was nominated again by President Obama and confirmed by the Senate in 2010. The Inspector General reports, and I quote, says that the DEA supervisors treated alleged sexual misconduct and sexual harassment as a local management or performance-related issue, end of quote. It also finds that when the administrator learned about these allegations, her agency imposed extremely light penalties. For example, when she was informed about wild parties involving prostitutes, she, and I quote, counseled the regional director for failing to report the allegations, end of quote. That was it. Just counseling. No other disciplinary actions. One critical question for the administrator is what women who work in these law enforcement agencies must think. With only counseling sessions and suspensions of 2 weeks or less for misconduct like this, what incentive do women employees have to report sexual harassment by their supervisors? So on Friday, the Attorney General sent a letter to the committee outlining steps to address the issues. And we were very pleased to receive that letter. These included re-examining the security clearances of those involved, reviewing DEA procedures for investigating misconduct, and prohibiting the solicitation of prostitution regardless of whether it may be legal overseas. These steps are critical, but they are clearly long overdue if the first instances of this misconduct occurred in 2001. Finally, let me note that these problems transcend politics. On March 27, Chairman Chaffetz and I wrote a bipartisan letter to the DEA announcing our investigation, and we are fully committed to working together to investigate these incidents, how the agency responded, and whether additional steps are needed to help prevent this misconduct from ever happening again. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. We hold the record open for 5 legislative days for any member who would like to submit a written statement. We'll now recognize our first and only panel of witnesses. We're pleased to welcome the Honorable Michelle Leonhardt, Administrator of the Drug Enforcement Agency, the Honorable Michael Horowitz, Inspector General of the United States Department of Justice, and Mr. Kevin Perkins, Associate Deputy Director of the FBI, the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We welcome all of you and thank you all for being here. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses will be sworn before they testify. If you'll please rise and raise your right hand. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you. Let the record reflect that all witnesses answered in the affirmative. In order to allow time for discussion, we would appreciate limiting your testimony to 5 minutes. Your entire written statement will be made part of the record. To the DEA Administrator, Ms. Leonhardt, will recognize you first.
Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, distinguished members of this committee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss the Department of Justice Office of the Inspector General's report on sexual harassment and misconduct allegations by the Department's law enforcement components. DEA has a single mission: to enforce our nation's drug laws. Our more than 9,000 employees, including over 4,600 special agents, are dedicated to this single mission. And each one of us took an oath, the same one I took over 30 years ago, to serve the citizens of the United States with honor, professionalism, and pride. DEA personnel located in over 300 offices around the world, including 67 foreign countries, are doing extraordinary work under often difficult and dangerous circumstances. And this includes the investigation and arrest of leaders of the most violent and sophisticated drug cartels in the world. Unfortunately, poor choices made by a few individuals can tarnish the reputation and overshadow the outstanding work being done at the DEA. I want to assure the members of this committee that, like you, I am disgusted, I am appalled by the behavior described in the Inspector General's report, and to see the integrity of my agency and of federal law enforcement, which I have been a part of for nearly my entire professional life, damaged by these allegations has not been easy. This conduct is a violation of the high professional standards of conduct that the men and women of the DEA are held to, and undermines our effectiveness in fulfilling our mission. And as noted in the report, this behavior is contrary to the behavior of the overwhelming majority of those at DEA. Although the OIG audit generally found that there were relatively few reported allegations of sexual harassment and sexual misconduct, the serious allegations OIG highlighted are certainly troubling and describe behaviors that cannot be ignored. In particular, the allegations that agents assigned in Bogota engaged in a prostitution and accepted gifts from drug traffickers was pursued by our Office of Professional Responsibility. However, the resulting investigation left some questions unanswered. Even though the events in question occurred between 2001 and 2004 and were not reported and investigated until 2010, it is nevertheless important that we hold our employees to the highest standards. And in this instance, I assure you that I was quite disappointed in the penalties imposed. However, consistent with the protections afforded to employees under civil service laws, I do not have the ability to change the imposed penalties. I can and do, however, ensure that disciplinary actions are appropriately noted in an employee's personnel file, which is taken into consideration when that employee is considered for future positions within the DEA. This behavior should not be rewarded. As outlined in my written statement, DEA concurred with and has begun implementing changes responsive to each of the OIG recommendations. However, it is also essential that we make clear to all employees that this behavior is not acceptable. It is my hope that the additional training and guidance that we have provided to all personnel, particularly those stationed overseas, will prevent similar incidents from occurring in the future. DEA has taken specific concrete steps to accomplish this, including ensuring that it is clearly understood by all DEA employees that this kind of behavior is unacceptable, outlining the steps employees and supervisors must take when incidents occur, increasing training for all employees, especially those employees assigned overseas, further clarifying the guidelines for disciplinary offenses, and improving internal procedures so that appropriate individuals in field management, in the Office of Security Programs, and in the Office of Professional Responsibility are made promptly aware of allegations and can take appropriate action in a timely manner. In closing, I want to reiterate that the kind of activity reported by the OIG has not and will not be tolerated. OIG plays an important role in reviewing our policies and procedures, and I am committed to working with the OIG to ensure they have access to the documents they need to do their work. We have taken steps to address this kind of behavior, and moving forward, DEA will respond to this kind of misconduct head-on and with the decisive resolve you and the public expect. We are open to further recommendations so that we can continuously improve our policies that demand the highest levels of personal and professional integrity from our employees. And thank you again for the opportunity to address you today.
Thank you. Now I recognize Mr. Horowitz for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Cummings, members of the committee, thank you for inviting me to testify today. Federal agents are held to the highest standards of conduct, both on and off duty. As a former federal prosecutor and as an Inspector General, it has been my experience that the overwhelming majority of department agents meet those high standards and perform their work with great integrity and honor, thereby helping keep our community safe and our country safe. Nevertheless, we find instances where law enforcement agents engage in serious misconduct and even criminal violations, affecting the agency's reputation, potentially compromising prosecutions, and possibly affecting the security of the agents and agency operations. Furthermore, misconduct that involves sexual harassment affects employee morale and creates a hostile work environment. Following the incidents during the President's trip to Colombia in 2012, the OIG conducted 2 reviews, one relating to department policies and training involving off-duty conduct by employees working in foreign countries, and one relating to the handling of allegations of sexual harassment and misconduct by the department's law enforcement components. Our off-duty conduct report found a lack of department-wide policies or training requirements pertaining to off-duty conduct, whether in the United States or in other countries. This was particularly concerning given that we made recommendations back in 1996 in an OIG report involving allegations at the time about department law enforcement agent off-duty conduct. Despite those earlier recommendations, we found little had changed in the intervening 2 decades. We did find, however, that the FBI made changes, including providing comprehensive training for its employees to help them make day-to-day decisions, to make appropriate day-to-day decisions about off-duty conduct while working abroad. However, we found that the other 3 department law enforcement components conveyed little or no information about off-duty conduct before sending their employees abroad. Having only 1 of 4 law enforcement components effectively preparing its employees for overseas assignments demonstrates the need for department-wide training and policies. In March 2015, we issued our report on the nature, frequency, reporting, investigation, and adjudication of allegations of sexual harassment or misconduct in the Department's 4 law enforcement components. The report identified significant systemic issues that require prompt corrective action by the Department. These issues include a lack of coordination between internal affairs offices and security personnel, failure to report misconduct allegations to component headquarters, failure to investigate allegations fully, weaknesses in the adjudication process, and weaknesses in detecting and preserving sexually explicit text messages and images. Together, our reviews demonstrate the need to improve disciplinary and security processes, as well as to clearly communicate to DOJ and components employees the expectations for employee conduct. Strong and unequivocal action from Department and component leadership at all levels is critical to ensure that Department employees meet the highest standards of conduct and are held fully accountable for any misconduct. As we also described in our March 2015 report, the failure by the DEA and FBI to promptly provide information we requested significantly impeded our review. Both agencies raised baseless legal objections and only relented when I elevated the issue to agency leadership. However, even then, the information we received was still incomplete. We therefore cannot be confident that the FBI and DEA provided us with all information relevant to this review. In addition, after we completed our draft report, we learned that the DEA failed to conduct the entire search of its database we had requested. In order to conduct effective oversight, the OIG must have timely and complete access to documents and materials. This review starkly demonstrates the dangers in allowing the Department and its components to decide on their own what documents they will share with the OIG. The delays we experienced impeded our work, delayed our ability to discover the significant issues we ultimately identified, wasted Department and OIG resources, and affected our confidence in the completeness of our review. Unfortunately, this was not an isolated incident. Rather, we faced repeated instances in which our timely access to records has been impeded. Congress recognized the significance of this impairment and included a provision in the recent Appropriations Act, Section 218, prohibiting the Department from impeding our timely access to records. Nevertheless, the FBI continues to proceed exactly as it did before Section 218 was adopted, spending appropriated funds to review records to determine if they should be withheld from the OIG. We're approaching the one-year anniversary of the Deputy Attorney General's request to the Office of Legal Counsel for an opinion on these matters. Yet that opinion remains outstanding, and we have been given no timeline for its issuance. Although the OIG has been told that the opinion is a priority, the length of time that has passed suggests otherwise. Instead, the status quo continues. The American public deserves and expects an OIG that is able to conduct rigorous oversight of the Department's activities. Unfortunately, our ability to conduct that oversight is being undercut every day that goes by without a resolution of this dispute. I want to thank the committee again for its bipartisan support for our work, and I would be pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Horowitz. We'll now recognize Mr. Perkins for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss issues raised in the Inspector General's audit entitled The Handling of Sexual Harassment and Misconduct Allegations by the Department's Law Enforcement Components. The FBI's policy on sexual harassment and sexual misconduct is very simple. The FBI does not tolerate sexual harassment or sexual misconduct within the ranks. The FBI has a robust disciplinary process guided by well-established policies, procedures, and practices. It consists of trained special agents in the Inspection Division's Internal Investigations Section who conduct thorough investigations of employee misconduct. When the investigation is completed, a team of experienced lawyers in the FBI's Office of Professional Responsibility take over, reviewing the investigative materials and determining whether applicable policies, rules, regulations, laws, or other legal standards were violated, and, if so, what penalties should be imposed on employees in question, up to and including dismissal. In addition, the Office of the Inspector General reviews all allegations of misconduct at the FBI prior to any investigation being initiated, and all final adjudications of misconduct at the FBI are reported on a regular basis to the OIG. We are pleased that the Office of the Inspector General found relatively few reported allegations of sexual harassment and sexual misconduct in the Department's law enforcement components for fiscal years 2009 through 2012. In fact, the OIG found that the FBI had the lowest rate of this type of misconduct across the components. While we strive to have no cases of sexual harassment or misconduct, we have and we will continue to implement measures to better address these types of allegations. We are also pleased that the OIG's audit recognizes the FBI's coordination between our internal investigations section and our security divisions as a best practice to ensure that misconduct allegations are evaluated for potential security concerns, including continued eligibility to hold a security clearance. Notwithstanding these findings, there are improvements to be made. We must always look to improve and evolve as an organization, and we appreciate the OIG's recommendations for making our process better. As a result, the FBI concurs with the recommendations in the OIG's report. The FBI takes very seriously our obligation to enable Congress and the OIG to conduct effective oversight of all of our activities. We work closely with the OIG staff to ensure that we are responsive to their requests and that issues are identified and promptly resolved. You may also be aware that we have a good faith disagreement with the OIG regarding what law requires with respect to providing FBI documents that have been obtained pursuant to provisions of law such as the Wiretap Act, the Bank Secrecy Act, and those related to grand jury proceedings. We have been completely transparent with the OIG and the leadership of the Department of Justice with respect to our legal disagreement and are presently awaiting the Office of Legal Counsel to render an opinion as to the correct reading of the law. In the interim, we are giving the OIG an assumption of access to these audits with respect to Title III, Rule 6E, and FCRA materials. Senior leadership has also directed that our internal business process consulting group rigorously evaluate our processes to ensure that we are as effective and efficient as possible in providing the Inspector General with requested documents in a timely fashion consistent with the law. Chairman Chaffetz, Ranking Member Cummings, and members of the committee, I thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today concerning our commitment to ensuring allegations of sexual harassment and misconduct are addressed in a prompt, thorough, and equitable manner. We take our responsibilities on this topic very seriously and appreciate your interest in these matters. Now I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you. I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Perkins, I totally disagree with your assessment that you're being open and transparent and providing access to the Inspector General. That is a topic we will continue to discuss today, but I find your comments to be totally inconsistent with what the Inspector General is telling us, and we need to hash that out. It's one of the reasons that you're here today. Glad that you're here. But my questions, I want to focus with the DEA here for a moment. Do you have any questions, Administrator, as to the accuracy of the OIG report? You don't question the accuracy of the report, do you?
I don't question the accuracy.
So this included allegations and examples of DEA agents participating in so-called sex parties where local police were watching DEA equipment. This included a, quote, loud party incidents involving what one would consider bad judgment, were allowing prostitutes and allowing those in close proximity with DEA agents to be actually in these agents' rooms and housing. You wouldn't then have a problem with this going away party that was involved the DEA assistant regional director at his residence. You wouldn't disagree then with the assessment that they had multiple accounts of the landlord complaining about the loud parties and whatnot were going in there. Is it wrong for prostitutes to be in government housing?
Well, first of all, it's deplorable behavior by those agents.
But is it a violation of policy?
It's absolutely a violation of policy.
Is it wrong to have a foreign national in close proximity to a DEA agent, close to their guns, personal effects, computer smartphones, does that pose any sort of security risk?
Of course, it poses security risks, and that is why these are very serious allegations.
Did you do any investigation as to the age of the women that were involved? Were they just simply there for entertainment?
The investigation, although it's 10 years later, the investigation,
You don't try to paint a picture that this is one incident 10 years ago. Okay, there's an incident, for instance, in July of 2009, for instance, where the DEA agent in Bogota was accused of physically assaulting a prostitute over a payment dispute. A security guard witnessed this agent throwing a glass and hitting the woman. This agent then claimed that the woman had a seizure while she was in the bathroom and cut herself on a candlestick, but it later admitted that, yes, he had engaged with a prostitute. And you know what the punishment for this person was? 14 days unpaid leave. Go on vacation for 2 weeks. You can sit here and cry a pretty picture about how deplorable it is, but your actions suggest otherwise, because there was not the consequence that should have happened. This person is imposing a national security risk, engaging in behavior that is just, it's embarrassing that we have to talk about this. It's an embarrassment that you don't fire that person. It's an embarrassment that you don't revoke his security clearance. Why can't you revoke their security clearance? What prohibits you from revoking that person's security clearance?
everything you've said about the behavior, I completely agree with. As far as the disciplinary penalties that were handed out in that case, I'm very disappointed in that.
You're
And
the administrator.
The system that's set up following civil service laws, I don't fire. I can't.
Can you revoke their security clearance?
I can't revoke their security clearance. I can ensure that there's a mechanism.
Why
put in
can't you?
place, like I did after the Cartagena incident, make sure that there's a mechanism in place for those security, for a security review, which resulted in those 3 agents having their security clearances revoked, and they were fired.
And here's the problem. Here's the concern I have. High profile. It's in all the media. Everybody's reporting about the Secret Service engaging with prostitutes. You all get nervous about it, and those people have some discipline. But when it's quiet and nobody hears about it, and it comes across your desk and your senior staff, can you show me another example where people were engaging in prostitution and in creating these national security problems where you revoke their security clearances? That's what I want to see. Because in this case, that's not what happened. That wasn't too long ago. You're not disputing any of the facts that show up in the report. There's nothing that, is there a statute of limitations? Is there a limit that you can't reach further back? And yet you allow this person who engages a prostitute, throws glass at her, breaks the skin, there's blood all over the place, and they're still employed at the DEA? And you allow that. You're allowing that. Did you try to fire them? Did you try to revoke their security clearance? Do we need to change that law? What do we need to do?
Well, you could look at an exemption like the FBI has, because the current disciplinary process, myself and other directors of federal law enforcement agencies are not allowed to invoke ourselves in the disciplinary process. If we were exempted, or if there was other legislation passed that would allow that, that would allow our directors of federal law enforcement to take that action. The same thing that with a result like Cartagena, where they have done these deplorable activities, that it is investigated, and that a decision is made by the agency without appeal rights to the MSPB.
Okay, so my concern is high profile, you take action. When it's not so high profile and there's a woman involved, you don't take action. And that's a concern, but I hear what you're saying. The last question, because I've exceeded my time. If you are both, the FBI and the DEA, sincere about rooting out this problem and finding solutions, then you need to allow the Inspector General to look at the information. Why do you continue to prohibit him from seeing that information? Why do you hold it back? Why not do all 45 search terms? Why did you only do 3? So I really got to question your sincerity about getting out and rooting out this problem if you don't even know the extent of the problem. You don't even know the extent of the cases because you won't even allow the Inspector General and his staff to actually look at the cases that are there. You're limiting the inspector from doing their job, which is to help you, help us, help them, help the rest of the agency. I need you to both explain that answer to me, and then I'll yield to the ranking member. Go ahead.
Moving forward, because there's a number of things that I put in place after Cartagena, and you should know that the other incidents I learned about after Cartagena, but they had already been through the system. What we put in place in Cartagena moving forward is the model for how we will handle.
Is the model to impede the ability of the Inspector General to look at the information?
I'm talking about the disciplinary.
I'm talking about the IG. Why can't the IG look at this?
And know that those cases, when they were first reported, are reported immediately over to the OIG. They handed those cases back to us to handle as management, as a management review. We felt that the behavior was so outrageous they needed to be investigated. What we've put in place.
But you went back and investigated him again and still came to the same conclusion that we would have came to the some conclusion. My time is far exceeded, but you gave him 2 to 10 days paid leave. You put him on vacation. You didn't take the disciplinary action. I've got to yield to the gentleman from Maryland. Okay, we're going to go actually to Ms. Plaskett first. Now recognized for 5 minutes plus very generous overtime if you need it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ranking Member. Good morning to you all. You know, of course, we all find the reports of sexual harassment and misconduct, particularly, I think, the actions of the DEA spanning back to 2001, extremely troubling. And the American people seem understandably outraged over this behavior, and particularly women. The IG report states, and I quote, sexual misconduct and sexual harassment in the workplace also affect employee morale and hamper employees' ability to have and maintain effective working relationships. Mr. Horowitz, can you explain how sexual harassment and sexual misconduct can impact employee morale?
Well, it has a significant debilitating effect on morale, particularly when the individuals in the workplace try to report the information and see no results. And that's one of the things we highlight here that's particularly concerning when, for example, in 3 of the incidents we identified, in one of them, we learned about it, or it was reported.
And which agency is that?
These are on the 3 matters involving DEA that we've been discussing. One is reported in June 2010 through an anonymous letter. That's how that information gets forwarded. The 2001 to 2004 events that are referred to in the report as the sex parties, those don't get reported until 2009, 2010, when the corrupt law enforcement officers are charged.
And what's the rationale that you were given as to why they weren't reported?
Because they were dealt with locally, reviewed locally, and didn't need to be reported to
And were they dealt with?
They were not, and that was the concern we identified. And on the 3rd incident that we report there, that's sent to the OIG and DEA by the State Department, not through the DEA. Employees in the organizations not only need to know they have a safe work environment to go to and a non-hostile work environment, but they need to know they can come forward, report allegations, and that they'll be taken seriously and that they'll be addressed promptly.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Leonhardt, you spoke about how your own outrage being a law enforcement officer for 30 years. I completely understand that. I was raised by a New York City police officer who says every good cop hates the most a bad cop because they make all the good cops. It completely taints everyone else. But do you agree with the IG that sexual harassment negatively impacts morale? And have you seen that in your agency?
I know it has the potential to do that, and that is why several directives, reminders.
But I didn't ask you its potential. I asked you, has it affected the morale?
in the offices where the employees attempted to report misconduct, and there was nothing that happened, it was not reported up and investigated, I can imagine that those employees felt they lost faith in the agency. In a number of other cases, however, where they are reported up, they are investigated, the supervisors take immediate action, help the employee who's come forward with a complaint. I see over my 35 years in DEA a huge change, more willingness to report, more willingness for supervisors to help that employee who came forward with it. And my job is to work on the disciplinary end to make sure that as these are reported, as they're thoroughly investigated, that the proper discipline is handed out.
Well, that's interesting that you say that it's your job to deal with the discipline, because you've just stated earlier to the chairman that you don't have any say over the discipline. So which one is it? Do you or don't you have say over the discipline of these individuals?
I am not in the process for investigating, proposing, or handing out discipline. What I can do is what I did a year ago. I sent out a directive to every DEA employee and said, here are the conduct issues I am concerned about. They must be reported. They're not acceptable. This is not acceptable behavior in about 5 or 6 different areas. And I sent a strong message to the Board of Conduct and to the deciding officials that in these type of instances, there should be severe discipline handed out.
And what would you consider severe discipline?
I would consider what happened with the Cartagena agents to be severe discipline.
What about the agents who were given 2 to 10 days of paid leave?
I'm not happy with that. I am not in the disciplinary process. I am very disappointed.
Okay, wait a minute. And so you're not in the disciplinary process, but you're responsible for the discipline.
I'm responsible for the whole agency. So I am responsible to set up a mechanism to send messages to our employees, to hold people accountable if they're not going to, if they're going to conduct this misbehavior, that they face significant discipline. And that is what I have done over the last couple of years, to send that message to make sure our employees, number one, report their allegations, and number two, hold managers accountable for not reporting, and number three, make sure that we set up a process, have good OPR inspectors. I was one at one time. Do the investigation so that our disciplinary process, our Board of Conduct that proposes, and our deciding officials have all the information they need to be able to impose severe discipline.
But don't you believe that the morale of your agents and the good men and the women of that agency would have been better served, and they would have believed that you really stood behind that if the information had been more fully and quickly forthcoming to the IG? How can you say that you you weren't pleased with the discipline when your agency impeded the investigation at the IG level?
The IG gave the investigation back to DEA.
They gave you the portion of it related to disciplining the individuals, not to investigating the systemic problems in the structure of your agency.
No, they gave us back the investigation and said that they would not take it. It looked like a management issue. We investigated as misconduct. And as we investigated it and we learned more and more by interviewing a number of witnesses in the old Bogota case, the information that was put together, the interviews, all of that was entered into the discipline system. And I am very disappointed that our discipline system did not do what it needed to do, and we have to fix it, and I've put mechanisms in place moving forward to make sure that that does not happen again, because I don't believe that that discipline that was doled out in those cases that Chairman Chaffetz mentioned is even close to what it should be.
Okay. I've run out of more than the generous time that you've given me, Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member, but it's my assessment that the discussion here and the actions are at a complete disconnect.
Thank the gentlewoman. Now recognize the gentleman from Florida, Mr. Miker, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And let me ask, let me follow up on some of the questioning that's taken place as to whether there was a full investigation of this whole matter. You claim, Administrator, that there was a full investigation of the matter. All of these sexual harassment, sexual assault issues that have been raised, that were that were part of the Inspector General's review. You claim, again, just tell us, you believe they were fully investigated.
I believe that they were investigated. I have concerns about the completeness, thoroughness of a couple of the investigations.
So then you agree with Mr. Horowitz, the OIG, that there was not a thorough investigation of all of the incidents?
I agree that some of the incidents were not thoroughly investigated
okay.
and fully investigated,
And,
yes.
and that was your position, too, and the assumption that I have from your report, correct,
That's
sir?
correct,
Okay.
Congressman.
Well, that in itself raises great questions when the Inspector General says that these incidents were not fully investigated. So that, to me, is a big issue right there.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes, I yield first.
And I hate to do this to you, on March, but I just was handed something, March 26th of this year, you, Ms. Leonhardt, as the administrator, sent this email out within your agency, and you said these allegations were fully investigated by the DEA Office of Professional Responsibility. Yield back.
Well, again, there seems to be a conflict between, again, what the chairman has just cited, what we've had as previous testimony, and what the Inspector General said. Okay, that being said, then I have some questions, too. You say you don't have the authority, but you took the authority post-Cartagena. It looks like before Cartagena, and you've been there since 2010? Is that right?
That's correct.
Like, you didn't just arrive on the block. And you see the conduct that took place in 2006, 2008, the sex parties, the assaults, all of these things that were going on. Cartagena was what, 2 years ago?
2012.
3 years ago. Well, what happened is you set up a culture within the agency that you could get away with this, and you were there. You must have known some of this was going on. Cartagena brought it to the press and our attention, the size and scope of what was going on. The thing that concerns me is before that, some of the people got who were involved, it looks like if you attended a sex party, one report here, one agent was cleared of any wrongdoing. 7 of 10 agents ultimately attended to the parties and engaging with prostitutes. So it looked like the penalty, they got suspensions of a few days, and I think the most was like six days up to that time. So that was sort of the standard operating procedure while you were there until Cartagena. That's the kind of penalty they were getting, right?
If I can explain, Congressman, the first I heard of any of these sex parties or the behavior that's described in the reports was actually Cartagena. When Cartagena happened, I became concerned, is this systemic? Has this happened before? And we went back and we took a look at where this activity had occurred, if anybody had been disciplined for it, and we found one Bogota case.
Well, again, we have instances and we have penalties. Most of them only got minor penalties. and it was known that some of this had been, had posed great security risks. I guess drug folks were paying for some of this activity, and they got anywhere from 4 to 6 days. Only a suspension of 15 days or more is considered serious for adverse employment action. So those people went right on working at that time. So what I'm saying is a culture existed while you were there up to Cartagena, and there were low penalties. After Cartagena, you took some action. Some people were actually fired. Is that correct?
Yes, that's the first
Okay,
case that
yeah.
came.
And the difference, folks, members of the committee, this is the same thing, whether it's Secret Service, VA, IRS, HUD, any agency. She doesn't have the right to summarily fire people. She has to go through a process, Merit System Protection, the protections of Title V, a federal act created by Congress. Unless you change that law and give these people the ability to fire people summarily when they are found in a proper process, at a speedy process, to violate, whether it's sexual assault, sexual harassment, you'll have this continue, all these problems continue across the scope of all of our civil service system. The only one exempt from that, I understand, is FBI. Didn't get enough time to ask you questions about how many people you fired, but we'll get that in the record at some point, I hope. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman. Now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Lynch, the gentleman from Massachusetts, who's the ranking member of the Subcommittee on National Security. Now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank the ranking member, Mr. Cummings, for allowing me to go in his place. Ms. Lenhart, how do you hold people accountable if you are not able to discipline them?
The system in place, it's a 3-tiered system. There's the inspectors who investigate.
You're not answering my question. How basically, very briefly, because I only have a couple of minutes, how do you hold people accountable when you cannot discipline them when they do like, okay, so we got 15 to 20 sex parties, 15 to 20. We've got all these allegations. A lot of these agents admitted to prostitution, to soliciting prostitutes, having sex with prostitutes. We don't know their ages because there's been nothing disclosed here. We have them taking weapons. We've got foreign individuals, parts of terrorist groups complicit in this. We've got national security at risk. And you don't have the ability to discipline these people. You know, when I came to this hearing, I thought my problem was that we weren't disciplining these people. I think the problem here, now after hearing you testify, even though you've said you were not happy, even though you said you were very disappointed, this is a prostitution ring. 15 to 20, they're using taxpayer money to solicit and pay for prostitutes. And you're very disappointed, you're not happy? I think we're at different levels here. And I find completely vapid the statement that we are not going to let this happen again. We're not doing anything. We're not doing anything. We haven't, we're actually, I think the problem now is we're protecting these people. That's what's happening in your agency. You're protecting the people who solicited prostitutes, who had 15 to 20 sex parties, went through this whole operation, used taxpayer money to do it, and I believe compromised the national security. And you're not happy. You know, that's not what I would expect from your department. I really wouldn't. I worked with DEA in Afghanistan, and those folks did a great job. And I think this is a disgrace that their reputation. I see, and they were in some dangerous places in Afghanistan, down in Helmand Province, trying to deal with the opium exportation there, doing heroic work. Those are the DEA agents that I know that worked hard and upheld the dignity of this country and worked with the local families down there, the farmers, just to try to protect them. I'm proud of those DEA agents They're doing wonderful work on behalf of our country. And this is a blemish. This is just disgraceful that they should be associated with this activity. So I actually feel your system is protecting these people. So there's these 15 or 20 sex parties, and then and by the way, it says here sexual harassment and misconduct. It should be sexual misconduct up front. That's what we're talking about here. This is a very serious issue, and you've done nothing. You've done nothing. How about disclosure? If you can't prosecute them, if you can't bring justice to this situation, why are we stopping the Inspector General from looking at this? Why do the American people why do they not have the names of these individuals?
Well, we did provide the Inspector General with the information so that he could do his review. As far as protecting them, I take great offense to that.
You
do.
You do. You take offense that someone who runs 15 to 20 prostitution parties, abusing women, gets a 3-day, 2-day, 1-day. You're offended by that? You're offended by that?
I'm offended by their conduct. I'm offended
I don't see it,
by
though.
the behavior. I am trying to fix a system. I can't fire. I'm trying to fix a system.
How about just naming them? Name and shame. How about that? There was some discipline here. It's laughable. It's laughable, but you did suspend some people here with pay for 1, 2, 3, 10 days. One guy got 10 days. Conduct unbecoming and poor judgment. It just, you know what I think? And I appreciate the gentleman's earlier comments about we've got to give you power. I don't think that's the answer. I think there's a mentality here that needs to be extricated root and branch from the DEA operation. I think we have to have an independent agency that actually goes in, that's not part of the good old boy network, that actually goes in and with sunlight, with disclosure, goes after these people who, like I say, when I think of the DEA agents and the jobs they're doing in Afghanistan, right today, and trying to protect the homeland, this is a disservice to those good agents. I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Farenthold, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Horwitz, Mr. Lynch really hit on something with respect to the good old boy culture. And this is my concern, that I'm seeing more and more of the good old boy culture as this committee continues its investigation. I mean, we've seen it with the DEA sex parties. We've seen it with some of the things going on in the Secret Service, admittedly, not subject to this. We see it in a lot of government agencies. In your investigation, do you get a sense that there is a good old boy mentality is as bad as I think it is?
Well, it's interesting, Congressman, you use those words, because our first review was of the good old boy roundup events back in the early 90s. We did a report in 1996 about the culture and the need to make it clear about what is permissible and what clearly isn't permissible on and off duty, and yet we're 20 years later and there are still no department-wide policies or training.
Ms. Leonhardt, you run the DEA. Do you think it's appropriate in your off time, even in a country where prostitution is illegal, to engage prostitutes?
Absolutely not, and it's against DEA policy.
And how
illegal.
How could any of your agents not know this? This strikes me as just common sense. And we have a memo from Eric Holder, admittedly not a fan of Mr. Holder, but I mean, I can't believe there's even a need for a memo that says it's not appropriate to hire prostitutes. Let me read from the memo, a couple of things from the memo. The solicitation of prostitution threatens the core mission of the department. not simply because it invites extortion, blackmail, and leaks of sensitive or classified information, but because it also undermines the Department's effort to eradicate the scourge of human trafficking. Regardless of whether prostitution is legal or tolerated in a particular jurisdiction, soliciting prostitutes creates a greater demand for human trafficking victims, and as a consequence, an increase in the number of minor and adult persons trafficked into commercial sex slavery. And now he goes on, for this reason, I want to reiterate to all Department personnel, including attorneys and law enforcement officers, that they're prohibited from soliciting, procuring, or accepting commercial sex. To me, it seems ludicrous that we would even have to write a memo like this. It defies common sense. Mr. Perkins, what about the FBI? Is there anybody in the FBI thinks it's okay to go hire a prostitute?
No, sir. We make it very clear to our employees, both here domestically and overseas, that's
But the message we're getting with no disciplinary action or time off with pay tends to reinforce that. Mr. Horowitz, is there congressional action that needs to be taken? Do we need to change some of our laws to make it easier to fire people who are proved to have engaged in this?
Well, that's certainly something Congress could look at. As been noted, the FBI has certain authorities that the other three components do not. I will add that one of the things that would help address these is that the OIG, that they get reported as they should to headquarters, that they get reported to the OIG as they should, and that we get copies of records that we need promptly so that we can look at them promptly. That would help as well, and that takes no congressional action because you already have the law in the IG Act that says that should occur, but it's not occurring.
All right. So what do we do to fix that? I mean, somebody's going to have to be disciplined for not reporting it. It's not just the rank and file men and women who are engaged in misconduct that need discipline. It's their superiors that are covering it up and obstructing. Is that not correct?
It's certainly our view that if a employee fails to report to headquarters what the policy requires, which in all law enforcement agencies' cases in the Department, that's the policy, that is a violation that should be looked at.
But we're also seeing you want disclosure from the folks that you're investigating. We're starting to see lots of redacted stuff here in Congress when the IG Act only says the identity needs to be withheld. In fact, had we wanted more information to withheld, we could have modified it on Section 6103 of the taxpayer of the IRS code. I mean, you want full reporting. What's the excuse for not giving us more access here in Congress? Anybody want to feel that? I mean, some of it's the IG, Mr. Horowitz.
We've certainly put forth on our website publicly and sent to Congress everything that we're allowed to put forth pursuant to the Privacy Act. We have not withheld material.
I think we have a differing interpretation of that, but I see I'm out of time.
If the gentleman will yield, Ms. Leonhardt, will you agree to allow the Inspector General to search all 45 terms? You've limited it to 3.
Yes. We don't have the search capabilities that his systems have.
Will you allow him full and unfettered access to review these records?
We would be glad to run that search. We had problems in doing a search of that many names. We found a different way to do it by running offense codes. But Mr. Horowitz and I have a very good working relationship, and if there's something that he wants, he has not hesitated to pick up the phone and talk to me about it, and we'll work it out.
Has she allowed you all the access that you want?
I think the problem has been that, frankly, I've had to call too much. I shouldn't have to make those calls, frankly, to the administrator to get access. The staff, my staff, shouldn't have to spend 4 months going back and forth with the line DEA staff getting redacted versions, being told they can't get things because of privacy issues when that is not a basis for a legal objection, which the DEA and the FBI ultimately conceded. I shouldn't have to be engaging at the highest levels of the FBI and the DEA to get the access that occurred. And let me just say something here about 2 agencies that complied fully. The ATF and the U.S. Marshal Service, got us the material immediately. We had no delays. What it took us 4, 5, I don't even know how many months to get from DEA and ATF, we got in a matter of weeks from ATF and the Marshal Service.
Did you
who
mean,
fully
I
cooperated
think you meant
with
to
us.
say DEA and FBI, correct?
I'm sorry, FBI and DEA compared to ATF and the Marshal Service, who fully cooperated with us.
Thank you very much. I see my time has expired.
Thank you. Now recognize the ranking member, Mr. Cummings, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much. Ms. Leonard, do you think that you're the right person for this job? You know, I just intentionally wanted to hear some of the testimony. I have a lot of concerns. It seems like there's a culture that has developed here, and even the Attorney General's letter, where he has to say, don't fraternize with prostitutes. Hello. Am I missing something? I mean, I think that we are at an all-time low here. Don't you?
As a DEA agent and a female DEA agent for the past 35 years, I'm appalled over this as well. And like the Attorney General had to send a memo reminding people last Friday, I had to send one last year to remind everyone and put everybody on notice.
Okay, I only have a few minutes, but I'm very concerned, Mr. Horowitz, and on page 12 of your report, you made the following statement, and I quote, "We found that a regional director, an acting assistant regional director, and a group supervisor failed to report through their chain of command or to the DEA OPR repeated allegations of DEA special agents patronizing prostitutes and frequenting a brothel while in an overseas posting, treating these allegations as local management issues." Is that correct?
That's correct.
So despite these facts, none of these employees, the special agent, the group supervisor, the regional director, and the acting assistant regional director ever reported these allegations to the Office of Professional Responsibility or to you at the IG's office. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now, Mr. Horowitz, when these allegations finally came to light in 2012, your report states, and I quote, "The DEA administrator counseled the regional director for failing to report the allegations." Is that right?
That's correct.
And Ms. Leonard, is that correct? Did you personally counsel the regional director?
The regional director was first counseled by the chief inspector. He was then counseled by the deputy administrator, and then I counseled him as well.
Now, was that the only discipline that he got? Somebody sitting there saying you're supposed to do your job?
Yes, he.
Please. You mean to tell me that was a discipline? Do your job. That's not discipline, is it? Come on.
The regional director was not aware of any allegations until it was brought to light a year after an incident. So
Who
when
was
I
the regional?
counseled him,
Okay.
so when I talked to him,
Well,
and
just
when-
tell us what you said very briefly. I only have a minute or so.
I was concerned that he had warnings that this person was involved with prostitutes, and I talked to him because if that was the case, I would have been looking at significant discipline. It was not the case with him. I even went and looked at the letters that were sent. The letters were
And so,
sent
so what
to
did he
the
say?
agent.
I mean, I wish I had a tape recording of that conversation. But
Right.
in 30 seconds, what was said by him?
He said when he was aware of it, he was notified by the embassy, the RSO, of what had happened. He was told about the incident. He called the agent in. That was the first he knew that this agent was involved in prostitutes. He called the agent in, told the agent, "You're out of here. You're going home." He sent him TDY back to the States until he could
So
finalize the
were they
tour.
suspended at all?
I'm sorry?
I mean, you said he sent them back to the United States.
Yes. The agent received 14 days off.
And so did you think that was sufficient?
The regional director took action when he heard about it, and he took action immediately after to put in place some mechanisms to make sure that those types of behaviors were reported promptly.
Who was the highest-ranking DEA official between 2001 and 2008 who was aware of these misconduct issues?
Are you talking about the Bogota incidents?
No, I'm talking about well, let me change that, 2005 to 2009.
That they were aware of it? Probably,
Yeah, the highest-ranking person.
probably a group supervisor.
Did you have power to discipline on the level of the regional?
I could
Director?
discipline the regional director. He's an SES.
So you could have fired him, is that right?
I couldn't fire him. You have to show misconduct for him to be fired. But with what the law allows me to do with an SES, he was counseled.
So you do feel that he did something wrong?
He failed to report it when he learned about it.
And so you failed to discipline him, other than counseling him?
The discipline available to me, appropriate discipline, was to reprimand him.
Well, who came up with the suspension then? I'm confused.
In SES, the discipline, there has to be misconduct.
Right.
And the discipline has to be 15 days or more. Reporting it to an embassy and working it out locally with the embassy rather than reporting it to OPR would not raise to that level. It's the only time that's happened with him, would not raise to the level to be misconduct.
Just one more question.
So I counseled him.
If reporting now, if he had reported it, he was supposed to report it to the Office of Professional Responsibility, is that correct?
That's correct.
And if he had reported it, there was a possibility that the agent would lose their security clearances. Is that right? Is that right, Mr. Horwitz? Do you know that?
They certainly could lose their security clearance if the process was followed through as it's supposed to be followed through.
And if they lost the security clearance, does that mean they then lose their job?
Yes, like the 3 Cartagena agents. If you lose your security clearance, then you cannot be a special agent.
So in looking at it in hindsight, the regional director, do you feel that he received appropriate discipline?
I believe he made a mistake by not reporting it in. He took action, but it wasn't the right action. And that has not happened with him in the past, and he's done a number of things in Colombia since that incident to ensure that this does not happen again.
Do you think there's a culture problem here?
I believe there may have been a culture problem.
May have been? May have been?
May have been a culture problem.
When did it stop?
Years back.
When did it stop? When did it stop? When you said may have been, so you're assuming that, I assume you have a date that you think it stopped, and I'd love to know what it is and why you say that.
When you see that these parties and what was happening in 2000 to 2004 were by one group of agents within Bogota, Colombia, I would say that's a culture problem.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Now I recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Mulvaney, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Leonard, I'm new to the committee, so I'm going to ask you questions that I'm just curious as to the answer because I'm very confused. You said some things today that I think strike me as being unusual. They may be true, and I'm certain if anybody back home was watching it, they don't understand it either. You say you can't fire people. Why can't you fire people? Everybody else can be fired. Why can't you fire people that work for you?
Under the civil service laws, I can't intervene in the disciplinary process, and that's why DEA's process, similar to some of the other agencies, is a 3-tiered process. The administrator, the deputy administrator, management cannot intervene in the disciplinary process, or that's a prohibited personnel practice.
Who can fire people when they commit misconduct, egregious misconduct like participating in cartel-funded prostitution?
Our deciding officials.
Who in your agency, who is a deciding official?
We have 2 deciding officials. They're senior DEA 1811s with prior OPR experience. They make all of the disciplinary decisions for the agency.
Are they senior to you or junior to you?
They're junior to me.
Could you recommend that they fire somebody? So you're saying you can't fire somebody, but somebody junior to you can fire somebody. Is that what you're telling us?
My position as administrator, under the Civil Service Act, we have to follow certain civil service protections. And so our system is set up that the discipline is decided by these 2 senior people within DEA, deciding officials who have...
Senior people, but not senior to you. But I get that then. So, okay, let's say that you wanted to fire these people. Let's say you saw some activity that merited somebody getting fired. Did you ever, by the way, have you ever seen that since you've worked there? Does any of this conduct that we've talked about today in these couple dozen sex parties, in your mind, merit dismissal?
The activity that's been explained today, I believe, not knowing all the facts, not knowing...
How can you possibly... I can't let you off the hook like that, Ms. Leonhardt. How do you not possibly know all the facts by now?
Not knowing the same facts that the deciding officials look at, which are called the Douglas factors. So not knowing that piece, only knowing what the behavior was and what the investigations show. I took action last year to put the agency on notice that activity like that, and I named it prostitution, and named 4 or 5 other things, required significant discipline. And that put our deciding officials and our Board of Conduct on notice.
Do you have any idea how absurd all of that sounds to an ordinary human being?
I can see someone not knowing the civil service system and not understanding our system would think that.
All right, let's assume, because I think I just asked you if you saw anything that merited somebody being dismissed, and you didn't say yes, which I assume means you meant no. But let's assume, for sake of this discussion, you saw something that merited dismissal. What would you do?
I can't intervene in the process the way the law is set up.
How do you start the process?
What I can do is put the agency on notice, like I did last year, that this will not be tolerated, and that I, in writing, told the deciding officials and the Board of Conduct that these kinds of behaviors required significant discipline.
Mr. Horowitz, Mr. Perkins, is it like this at the other agencies? Does everybody deal with these arcane rules at other agencies?
Congressman, I can't speak for the other agencies, but for the FBI, we are exempt from Title V and the Civil Service rules, regulations, and statutes. Director Comey can and has summarily fired individuals. We do have a highly structured disciplinary process within the Bureau that will, as you go through the process, it raises it up to the appropriate levels for the appropriate level of punishment. There are occasions when the conduct is so egregious that the director can intercede and summarily dismiss somebody, and has.
Mr. Horowitz?
My understanding is that the FBI is unique in that regard, as Mr. Perkins outlined, and that the other 3 law enforcement components in the Department have to follow the Title V rules and the Civil Service rules.
One last question from Ms. Leonhardt, then I'll wrap up. Is it true, Ms. Leonhardt, that if you suggest a suspension longer than 14 days, and in all the examples that I've got the paperwork on these couple dozen events, no one was ever suspended for more than 14 days. Is it true that if you recommend, or if someone gets a suspension of more than 14 days, that a Merit System Protection Board takes over the investigation and the handling of that matter?
Not quite. If the deciding officials dole out discipline and it's more than 14 days suspension, the employee can appeal it. And when the employee appeals it, it goes to the Merit System Protection Board.
And who takes over the investigation of the matter when the Merit System Protection Board gets involved?
No one takes over the investigation because the investigation has already been done. This is at the very end of the disciplinary process. So the DEA deciding official can say 30 days.
But is that internal to you or is it external to you?
The deciding officials is internal, the MSPB is external.
Thank the gentleman.
I thank the Chairman, and I asked both the Chairman and the Ranking Member to, this is nuts. How we can't fix this, I have no idea, but clearly she's telling us she doesn't have the legal authority to do what everybody on this committee thinks that she should have done. Maybe we should try and figure out a way to fix that.
Now I recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. DeSaliene, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will say, as a new member of this body, I keep thinking I've gone through the looking glass and I won't do it again. And then you come to a hearing like this, and this just seems, on the surface, it's hard to believe. And it does bring a number of questions, including sort of the collateral consequences to drug dealers on the street and the larger problems we have to face in this country when people see this kind of different type of administration of justice. So, Mr. Horowitz, first question is, what was different, do you think, between ATF and the U.S. Marshal that your underlings, your mid-management people were able to access the information you asked for so quickly as opposed to the DEA or the FBI?
They've been fully cooperative throughout our reviews, have not raised legal objections, and have read the IG Act and complied with what we've asked for.
Is it a cultural thing? Is it an enforcement thing? Do you need more enforceability?
Well, certainly we don't have any enforceability at this point other than my testifying publicly and raising it to the
Doesn't seem to be sufficient in this instance.
folks. It ultimately turns out to be in some instances, but it is a problem, and it's a repeated problem.
Ms. Leonhardt, so the individuals involved in these sex parties, the Rolex, the accepting sophisticated weapons, are they still employed?
The majority are still on the job, yes.
And it's hard to believe, it just seems completely counterintuitive that they could go back to work with as little as 10 days suspensions and be model agents. Have you had to spend extra time overseeing their job performance?
Their supervisors, their special agents in charge, or their high-level bosses are aware of the conduct. And with the exception of one, we have not seen any misconduct since.
Do they have heightened supervision because of their past conduct?
The reason that the supervisors are made aware of what the conduct is so that they can put them in positions where they can have good supervision.
So go back to the questions I asked Mr. Horowitz. Why is it that it took so long to get this information? Why did it take so long for the IG to get the information from your underlings? Of being aware that didn't you feel at some point that you were spending too much time on this? Didn't you admonish people underneath your command that they should be more forthcoming to the IG?
Well, I knew early on that there was disagreement or misunderstanding in a couple of areas. What the scope of the audit was, that delayed it. What type of records they were looking for, that delayed it. I wish I would have known about all of those delays and I could have done something more about it. But at the end of the day, the reports did get to Mr. Horowitz. And with audits since, he and I, we kind of have an agreement that if someone is going to deny something to the IG, that it has to be raised up to my level right away so that he and I can discuss it.
Sitting here, it seems like it's a question of management that you have to spend this amount of resources in something that's such an egregious case. It just seems a misappropriation of taxpayer funds. So, Mr. Horowitz, if the DEA had at that time the same exemption that the FBI has, would that have been a more efficient response by Congress in terms of making sure that the management tools were there?
Well, certainly on the personnel side and the discipline side, that would be something that could occur. Frankly, on the access issues and getting the records promptly, there's no reason why DEA and FBI shouldn't have done the same thing the Marshal Service and ATF did. They didn't question the scope of our audit. They didn't raise concerns about whether we could see names or see the facts or run the search terms. They just did it.
So that seems, Ms. Leonhardt, you're complicit in the management problems, that it's not just a culture problem, And with all due respect to your years of service, we heard this, I believe, from the IG when it came to Secret Service. Sometimes you need somebody from the outside. So how do I defend your performance?
I think being a DEA agent and being within the agency, I can intervene in ways.
All evidence to the contrary, with all due respect in this case.
On this audit, I think that there was misunderstandings, misunderstandings of what the scope was, as well as misunderstandings on this Bogota case, or on this Bogota case.
Ms. Leonhardt,
it was not a closed case.
Excuse me, my time's expired. But for me to go back and talk to somebody in a poor section of my district or any of these members who have people who are selling drugs who say, how can you admonish us and want to make laws tougher for us when you let the DEA manage their own department this way is quite, it's counterintuitive, with all due respect. I yield back what time I have.
Thank the gentleman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Gowdy, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Administrator Leonhardt, if an agent stateside were soliciting a prostitute that was provided by a drug conspiracy he was investigating, what punishment would you recommend?
I can't recommend a punishment. I would just hope that would be thoroughly investigated. And
so you're telling me nobody cares what the administrator of the DEA thinks should happen to an agent? You're powerless to express your opinion. You have no First Amendment right when it comes to who works for your agency.
I have expressed my opinion in
What
a
was
number
your
of
opinion?
ways.
What did you express? What did you think the proper sanction was?
Last year, I sent email and I sent a memo to every employee in DEA and put them on notice that this kind of conduct was not acceptable.
My question must have been ambiguous because I wasn't talking about future conduct. I was talking about past conduct. What punishment did you recommend for conduct that happened in the past?
Under the civil service law, I cannot recommend a penalty. I can't intervene in the disciplinary process. I can't even make a recommendation.
What
to
does
the
it take to get,
officials.
what would it, hypothetically, what would it take to get fired as a DEA agent? Because the agents I used to work with were worried about using their car to go pick up dry cleaning. They were actually worried about using their OGV to pick up dry cleaning. They were worried about being disciplined. So apparently that world has changed. Do you know whether any of the prostitutes were underage?
I don't know that.
Would that impact whatever recommendation you might have in terms of a sanction?
I don't recommend the sanction. I can't fire. I can't recommend a penalty. There's a guide that the deciding officials abide by, and they have a penalty guide that they look at. And the penalty guide for this kind of activity is anything from reprimand to removal.
How about security clearance? Do you have any impact over that, whether or not an agent has a security clearance?
No, there's adjudicative guidelines, and that has to be adjudicated by the security people.
What power do you have? You have to work with agents over whom you can't discipline and have no control, and you have no control over the security clearance. What the hell do you get to do?
What I can do is build on and improve mechanisms to make sure that the outcome is what we believe the outcome should be. And that is what happened in Cartagena. That is what's going to happen moving forward.
Inspector General Horowitz, I find that stunning. Let me ask you this. Did the agents know that the cartels were providing the prostitutes?
What we found, Congressman, from looking in the file was that they should have known, given their trained law enforcement agents, and they were dealing with corrupt law enforcement, local law enforcement, that was providing them with the prostitutes as well as the various gifts.
Were they supposed to be investigating these cartels?
They were.
So they are receiving prostitutes from cartels that they are supposed to be investigating. And she can't fire those agents. You agree with her? She can't fire them?
I think as a matter of Title V, she can't directly intervene and fire them. I do think one of the concerns we outline in the report as to DEA and the other 3 agencies is how they adjudicate these cases. They undercharge them in some instances. And so at DEA, for example, sexual harassment, if you're charged with that, there's only one punishment: removal. But if you're charged with conduct unbecoming or poor judgment, which isn't even actually a category, then you've got a range of penalties. And so one of the issues, as you know as a former prosecutor, is how you charge the case. And that has a consequence.
Well, Mr. Chairman, I don't know what would need to be done, but I, like my friend from South Carolina, find it stunning that you can solicit prostitutes. Administrator Leonhardt, do we know whether any of the prostitutes were underage? Do we know whether any of them were part of any human trafficking rings?
Because the Bogota case happened a decade ago, there were no interviews of prostitutes. On the more recent one, the Cartagena one, it did not identify an age for the prostitute involved.
Mr. Chairman, I would just find it impossible to explain to any reasonable-minded person how an agent cannot be disciplined for soliciting prostitutes from drug cartels that they were ostensibly investigating. I find that stunning.
If the gentleman will yield, if somebody murdered somebody, could you fire him?
If someone murdered someone, there would be criminal charges, and that's how they'd be fired.
But if they were, could you take away their security clearance?
The Office's security programs can review security clearances and take their clearances, just as they did with the 3 agents in the Cartagena incident.
Gentleman from South Carolina.
Gentleman, yield for just a second. I'm sorry, I heard you say that there's one thing you could actually fire somebody for, which is sexual harassment. So let me see if I get this correct, Mr. Horowitz, Mrs. Leonhardt. If I flirt with a coworker in the office and that constitutes sexual harassment, I can be fired, but I can take an underage hooker from a cartel I'm investigating and you can't fire me. Is that what we're talking about here?
Actually, Congressman, if you charge the offense, removal is a possibility. If you charge something less, conduct unbecoming or poor judgment, you don't charge what actually occurred, that's when the ability to discipline is limited. And that's the concern we found, as you know, in our report.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman, both from South Carolina. We'll now recognize the gentleman from California, Mr. Liu, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. I'd like to focus a little bit about the possible security risks from these sex parties. And on page 15 of the OPR report, it says the following. It says, Mr. Cooperator 2 stated he believed that Mr. Cooperator 1 gained information from the U.S. agents by getting their guard down through the use of prostitutes and paying for parties. Mr. Cooperator 1 bragged about the parties with prostitutes and how he sold relationship closeness with agents to Mr. Cooperator 2. And then Mr. Cooperator 1 said that he could easily get the agents to talk. So, Ms. Leonhardt, do you believe actual information was compromised through these sex parties?
There's no evidence that that any was compromised, but the concern is that participating in this kind of behavior, bringing foreign nationals, bringing prostitutes to your GLQ, bringing them around other agents, all of those are security risks.
Doesn't the report itself provide evidence that you had agents in compromised positions, that at least foreign officials believed that the agents were compromised and they could get the agents to talk? Did you do an investigation? How do you know that agents didn't say something that they maybe should not have said or disclose some information they should not have?
Reading the report, one of the concerns was that the agents got very close to these 2 corrupt Colombian national police. and that the Colombian National Police were providing prostitutes and gifts to get in the good graces of the agent, and that's about the furthest that it goes.
Did you then do an investigation as to what information may or may not have been leaked?
The OPR investigation, because it was 10 years after the fact, did not identify any instances, and in fact, the agents were all out of country by the time it was investigated. But that
So
is
it's
a
possible
major
that information
concern.
was leaked or compromised.
Absolutely, that's a major concern.
So let me focus again on this discipline issue. When I served active duty in the Air Force and still in the reserves as a JAG, I dealt with the Douglas factors, and I understand some of the restrictions that you have because we're a civil service system. The FBI is not under Title V. DEA agents, like FBI agents, go undercover. They're law enforcement. Any reason not to move the DEA out of Title V?
We would entertain any look at that, any exemption that could be given so that an administrator or director can take action and make sure that only the people with outstanding reputations and ethics are employed by the agency.
If the deciding officials make a decision you don't like, can you do anything with that decision?
I can't do anything with the decision, but I can do what I did last year, and that is put on notice for the entire workforce, not any one particular case, put on notice for the entire workforce that this behavior is unacceptable, and that I ordered the deciding officials and the Board of Conduct to consider significant discipline to include up to removal for behavior in these areas moving forward.
Now, even though there are civil service protections for sort of the rank and file, when something goes badly wrong and it's a climate issue, a cultural issue, what happens is leadership resigns or gets fired. So for example, in the Air Force, when there was problems with some of the nuclear weapons we had, even though the Secretary of the Air Force at the time, the Chief of Staff of the Air Force at the time really didn't know about it, wasn't aware, but because those things happened, they were both removed. Secret Service, their head is gone. Do you believe it's a climate issue? And if it's a climate issue, do you believe then maybe instead of focusing just on the rank and file, maybe you need leadership changed or removed?
We have changed leadership. We have a different set of leaders within DEA now than we did a decade ago. And I believe that moving forward with a better system to deal with discipline, and moving forward with, instead of looking at what the discipline was in the past that was doled out to individuals who took part in this kind of behavior, the deciding officials and the Board of Conduct has the clear ability now to, it's a reset, and they can look at the activity and they can say this is, the administrator said this is, deserves significant discipline, and they can take that kind of action.
Okay, thank you. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Walker, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Leonhardt, you have said earlier today that you do not dispute the report, I believe is your exact words, yet a couple times you've mentioned this was an isolated incident. From what we've heard today, this has been sort of a spring break frat party mentality for the last 15 years. Now, the adjudicative guidelines for determining eligibility for access to classified information, these are the considerations for whether or not someone is given a security clearance. Is that correct? Okay. Part of the guidelines covers conduct that reflects lack of judgment or a person's ability to protect classified information. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Are you aware of anyone who's ever been fired for breaching that?
Cartagena, the 3 agents, and we've had other agents throughout DA's history that have been.
Did you ever have a role in someone losing their job because of the security breaches?
Cartagena.
Okay. Soliciting prostitutes, does that expose an agent to blackmail? Weren't some of those agents married?
I believe so.
You know what really even is to me is a more potent question. 2 weeks ago, we had the largest human trafficking event in North Carolina, brought members from 40 agencies across the state. Talked about the human trafficking specifically that drug cartels are involved with. 83% of those girls are from 12 to 14. So my question is this: having gratuitous sex with an underage prostitute, first of all, how egregious it is to even use that despicable language. But second of all, at what point does it become a security breach? You've mentioned the word appalled several times. Are you appalled with that?
Absolutely.
Well, how appalled do you have to be before you jump up and down and scream and holler and said, this cannot be tolerated?
The first incident that I had any dealings with in this manner or about this behavior was Cartagena, and I made sure that the disciplinary system, that there was coordination between the people that do the investigations and the people that do the security clearances, because I, like you, feel it is outrageous behavior, but there are security concerns. They have put themselves in danger. They have put other agents in danger. They have not
Sure they
protected.
have. But listen, there's no statute of limitations in our own countries for having sex with a 13 or 14-year-old. Why are you just telling me that, well, that was long ago, but picking up at this point on, we're trying to, I don't understand that. Can you help me understand it?
Well, I will say that the security clearances of all the people involved in the Bogota incident, the one person involved in 2009, those security clearances are currently under review by the Department of Justice.
Do you have any concrete proof of the age of these prostitutes that these men were involved with? Have you done any research on that at all? Is there any record that you've read?
I have read the reports, and there's nothing to indicate a name.
So maybe nobody ever even asked that question. Let me ask you something else. Last Friday, April 10th, the chairman referred to this a little bit earlier. 3 days before this hearing, the Attorney General had to send out a memo reminding law enforcement agents that they are not to solicit prostitutes. Are you familiar with that memo?
Yes, I am.
The problem with it, or else what? What happens? Just a reminder, I mean, first of all, the fact that we have to remind these agents to be on your best behavior is ludicrous. But the fact is, then what? Evidently, in the past, hey, you may take a couple of days off or even unpaid for 2 weeks at the most. Where's the or else in this? Would you answer that question? What happens? I mean, the Attorney General sent it out. So listen, hey, guys, leave the prostitutes alone. Or what else? Or what's the penalty? What's the concrete solution that has been clearly communicated? Can you explain that or talk about that?
Well, working within our system, in the same way the Attorney General put the entire Department of Justice on notice, last year, put the entire DEA workforce on notice that this type of behavior was not to be tolerated and that there would be significant discipline.
Well, I have 3 children, and I tell them, talk about sometimes not to do that, but unless the consequences are very clearly communicated, I don't have a shot that they're change the behavior. Last question, and I'll yield back. If you had a chance going back, would you be so appalled that you would do some things different in handling these matters?
Without a doubt.
Thank you. Yield back.
I thank the gentleman. The chair recognizes the gentlewoman from the District of Columbia, Ms. Norton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I don't know how to describe what we've seen here. Boys going wild, out of sight, out of mind. But what we do know, and what most concerns me, is how these prostitutes were funded. It looks like we have implicated taxpayer funds, that some may have come out of official funds and some out of cartel funds. It's hard for me to know which is worse. But But it does seem pretty clear that we may be dealing, to be sure, with a cultural problem, but with a cultural problem that is so deep that it is now a problem of corruption. And I say that because I'm looking at some of the excerpts from the reports where apparently they were a cooperating witness. And so some of this is so eye-popping, I'm going to have to ask you, what is your response? I'm not going to ask you about why you don't fire people, because I do understand that when the state, that's the United States, or any of its agents, is an actor, then due process, of course, requires you to go through certain processes. And after all, those processes have been put there by the Congress of the United States. So I'm going to ask you about some things that perhaps you could do. This cooperating witness stated he recalled that the ASAC, that's the Assistant Special Agent in Charge, I believe, that his farewell party were part of that was in 2003 and 4, where part of the money requested from an operational budget, those are the operative terms, operational budget, was used for his party. He stated that his party was organized by the Assistant Special Agent in Charge, and that he paid 500,000 pesos, that's approximately $261, for each prostitute with funds from an operational budget. Now, I want to try to identify what that means. What is the purpose, Ms. Leonhardt, of an operational budget? Is it taxpayer funds?
What I believe that refers to is money is given to the Colombian National Police to pay for their operations that they're doing in collaboration with us.
So it's given, taxpayer funds are given to them. So what we're talking about, funds that were paid not by the, in this case, out of the operational budget, it looks like by agents. Who is responsible for accounting for these funds in the regional office?
The regional director would be responsible for that.
Now, if that's the case, since of course you have indicated, and I understand why you can't precipitously fire someone as if this were the private sector when the state is an agent, would that fund continue to be under the same supervision if you had having this kind of information as it was before?
The Bogota incident you're talking about was 3 regional directors ago, and the way that DEA operates with the Colombian National Police in these special units has completely changed since.
Well, I didn't ask you that. I'm asking how the operational, and now how is the operational budget dealt with? In other words, now it is not in control of the agents themselves to pass out this money to Bogota or anybody else? Is it controlled from your office?
No, the funds by the DEA Bogota office that go to the Colombian National Police for operations now are audited. They require receipts. The 2000 to 2003 time frame was at the beginning stages of these units.
Well, according to this cooperating witness, again, it's the word operational budgets were presented to the DEA, and there was additional information here I want to quote. For additional funds, apparently not enough funds were in the operational budget, for additional funds which were used for prostitution and parties for agents. Are you aware of that allegation, that they didn't have enough, so they went back and got some more funds?
I'm aware that the corrupt national police officers who ended up being indicted by DEA and convicted, that what they were talking about is padding their operational requests that went to DEA to get additional money.
In other words, fraudulent budgets.
Yes, on behalf of the Columbia National Police.
You can't wash the hands of the office. Look, this is a cooperating witness here who stated that the operational budgets were presented to the DEA to cover operational expenses. So it doesn't seem to me you can wash your hands of that at the DEA, or that they could have washed their hands of that. Has someone looked back at how these funds were expended during this period, so that you can now lay out exactly what happened during this period? Part of the problem here, and the frustration, I think, of the committee, is that it's taken so long because you had no policy to go up the chain of command. And so you can tell me, well, this was 2003 and 2004, but I tell you, if I was there, I'd want to know exactly what happened then, so I make sure it wasn't happening now.
One part of the investigation was to go through and audit and do just that.
From that period?
Yeah, to look at the books from that period of time.
Because we understand, again, from one of these cooperating witnesses, he could obtain, this is a quote, prostitutes for agents from the DEA Bogota office. This is what the cooperating witness said. He would pay the girls to come to the parties, and then the agents would pay the girls directly for any sex they wanted. He recalled getting prostitutes for at least 15 to 20 parties. Weren't the DEA agents in Colombia there to crack down on the agents who were on the cartels who were given funds to pay for these parties?
The gentlewoman's time has expired, but the gentlewoman may answer.
That's what's so appalling about this, that although the agents didn't know, the corrupt police were getting money from the traffickers. They were on their payroll and using that money for the prostitutes.
Thank the gentlewoman. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Heiss, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Horowitz, in your office report, you noted that during the interviews, some in your office staff were evidently told that some DEA employees were under the impression, at least, that they were not to discuss information regarding open cases. Do you know who provided that information?
We don't know who told them that information, but that is, in fact, what we were told.
All right. So did you ever determine whether or not the DEA staff, in fact, someone communicated that information?
We didn't determine definitively whether it occurred. We believe it did occur, given we were told that by several individuals.
All right. So you were told by several individuals. That was not an isolated incident. All right. So you did not investigate further?
We did not.
Okay. Ms. Leonhardt, did your office ever give information, instructions to that effect?
No, my office didn't, and when the report, I saw the draft asking the Office of Professional Responsibility and Inspections about that, they said that there was a miscommunication. They were under the belief that closed cases were not a part of what Mr. Horowitz's audit would cover.
All right. Well, there was obvious confusion. Did you yourself at any time ever give instruction to anyone to withhold information?
Absolutely not.
Did anyone in your staff?
No, no one in.
How do you know?
Because we weren't involved in that part of the process.
Well, then you can't definitively say that no one did it. If you weren't involved in the process, I mean, obviously there were reports, there was testimony given to Mr. Horowitz's team that your employees were instructed not to give information.
The inspectors that were interviewed received instructions from OPR and the Office of Inspections. I have no information about what information was relayed to them other than it was relayed.
All right, so you don't know
confusion
is the bottom line. You don't know if that information was relayed or not. Let me, Ms. Leonhardt, you are all over the board today. You say you can't fire anyone and that you didn't have all the facts, and yet you send information that this behavior is not going to be tolerated. is absolutely all over the board. You have junior officers who evidently can fire, but you cannot fire. Do you have any authority over them? Can you fire those junior officers?
If they are not doing their job, they can be replaced, and that is done by the
Did they do their
career
job
board.
by not disciplining appropriately in this situation?
I'm disappointed in the discipline. I think that it's not enough.
So why were those junior officers not replaced?
Again, I can't interfere with the disciplinary process, but I can make sure through our career board that replacements or people that are coming up to take those positions are of utmost
So do you or do you
integrity.
not have any authority over the junior officers?
I don't have the authority to intervene in the disciplinary process.
All right, a moment ago you said you would act differently if you had this to do all over again. Why in the world would you say that? It seems that you've made it clear today that your hands are tied, that you can do nothing. I'm really having a difficult time understanding. It appears to me that no one listens to you, quite frankly. You write a letter saying this behavior is not going to be tolerated, and yet you have no influence as to whether that behavior is going to be tolerated or not. Did anyone listen to you when you wrote that letter?
Yes, the entire workforce listened to me, and in fact, like me.
Why would they listen to you if you have no influence whatsoever on the disciplinary process? Ms. Leonhardt, I've just got to tell you, you say you're in charge of discipline on one hand, then you come back and you say you have nothing to do with discipline. You're in charge of the entire agency. Then you come back and say you have nothing to do with correcting problems. Quite honestly, I have serious questions as to your competence, quite frankly, and it appears to me that we need to seriously consider new leadership at the DEA. And I yield back the balance of my time.
Before the gentleman yields back, I'd like to give Mr. Horowitz an opportunity to respond to the questions that Mr. Heiss was asking earlier. If you could address that directly, Mr. Horowitz.
Sure, certainly. With regard to the production of information and answering questions, again, the frustration we had with both the FBI and DEA during this process was we kept having to go back and ask for more once we learned what we weren't told originally. That was the case with regard to documents. We got redacted information. I had to elevate it in both instances months after this all started. With regard to the interviews, we learned later in the process that certain individuals at DEA that we had interviewed hadn't told us about an open case because of their understanding that they shouldn't talk about an open case. We found out that when we did get productions from both the FBI and the DEA that they didn't give us everything. We only learned that because we went back and checked our own records to compare and see if we had everything whether they provided us with everything that we already had. We thought they had even more than we had, which is why we went to them in the first instance for the information. But then we found out that the production was incomplete. We then had to go back and ask for a further review. And then after we did the draft report, we found out that the DEA hadn't run all the search terms we had done without telling us that they had made that decision on their own. So we had multiple instances where that occurred. It delayed our report. I can assure you it frustrated the good, hardworking folks in my office who spent months just trying to get information. And I will go back to what I said earlier. The ATF and the U.S. Marshal Service, we asked made the same requests of them. We got the material, and we got it fast. And we never thought we didn't get from them what we were entitled to. That should have happened across the board, and it should be happening across the board in all instances.
Appreciate it. We'll now recognize the gentleman from Virginia, Mr. Conley, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. Mr. Horowitz, the IG report we're discussing today would seem to suggest that DEA's tolerance level for prostitution depends on the local culture in which what we'd call offense occurs. For example, your report says the DEA inspector told us that prostitution is considered a part of the local culture and is tolerated in certain areas called tolerance zones. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Ms. Leonhardt, does the DEA recognize that prostitution is embedded in certain local cultures and by implication therefore tolerable, and that you recognize, the agency recognizes tolerance zones for prostitution?
No, what I believe the inspector was talking about was in Colombia, there's certain tolerance zones for prostitution. It doesn't matter with the DEA. The partaking in that kind of behavior is against all DEA policies. It's not, it doesn't matter if it's legal in a particular country. It doesn't matter if it's legal in a particular area of a city. It doesn't matter. They're not to take part in that type of behavior.
So it's always wrong in terms of your policy, no matter where, no matter when, no matter what the circumstances.
That's correct.
And that's an explicit policy?
You find it in our personnel manual. You find it would.
There's a chapter called "Thou Shalt Not."
Basically, it's very clear.
Okay. Mr. Horowitz, did you confirm that?
Well, certainly that wasn't the case back during the course of the years that we reviewed this. That's the problems that we identified here.
It was not the case.
That was not, certainly not the culture and certainly not the understanding based on the interviews we conducted.
I'm going to get to that, but did you find an explicit policy in their personnel manual, human resource policy, that explicitly barred such illicit activity?
It did not at that time. It does now in light of both the Administrator's memo and the Attorney General's memo.
So, Ms. Leonhardt, when you said to me just now, that's a violation of our existing policy, you meant the new existing policy. Is that correct?
The new existing policy, but it existed in our personnel manual in a couple of different sections. One about you cannot have a relationship with someone involved in illegal activity. You can't do anything.
Well, wait a minute. Wait. You just said to me that the tolerance zones referred to Colombia, not to DEA designating tolerance zones, in which prostitution, in fact, was legal. You just cited something that refers to illegal. But if you go to Colombia, it is not illegal in certain parts of the country. And did your policy, therefore, in a sense, open the door for what we would consider, in most of the United States, illegal activity that was not prohibited in the host country?
What we found with the Cartagena case was our policies didn't specifically say you cannot partake in prostitution, but we had different sections in our personnel manual, different sections in our standards of conduct that every agent in the agency signs once a year and acknowledges. Things such as DEA personnel are prohibited from engaging in any criminal, infamous, dishonest, or notoriously disgraceful conduct or other conduct prejudicial to DEA, to DOJ, or the government of the United States.
Well, apparently some of your agents, when they went to Cartagena, thought prostitution was not included in that litany.
No DEA agent thought that prostitution was okay.
Well, I don't think that's what the Inspector General found. Let me read to you further from the report. According to the inspector, it is common for prostitutes to be present at business meetings involving cartel members and foreign officers. The DEA inspector also stated that the acceptability of this type of behavior affects the way in which Federal law enforcement employees conduct themselves in a particular country. So what you just read to us notwithstanding, the practice seems to be very much contingent upon local acceptable practices. And we're influenced by that, your policy notwithstanding. Would that be fair to say?
I would say every DEA agent knows to include going back to 2000 to 2004 in that period of time, knows that partaking in that kind of activity is against DEA policy. When Cartagena happened, and we reviewed all our policies just to make sure, we decided to strengthen them and to put wording in about prostitution specifically, just to put everybody on notice and make sure it was clear. Our policies were not as clear. They did not specifically say prostitution, but there are 3 or 4 different places in our standards of conduct where you could point to that and say that's a violation of standards of conduct.
Would the Chairman allow me one more question? I just have one more question, if the Chair would indulge. Please. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Perkins, the report talks about FBI providing employees with extensive pre-deployment training regarding conduct abroad, and has done the most to prepare its employees to make day-to-day decisions, unlike apparently DEA or even the Secret Service. Can you comment on that? I mean, does your training program in terms of deployment overseas explicitly deal with issues like prostitution and the sense of dishonor it brings on the United States if its employees engage in that kind of activity?
Yes, Congressman. It actually covers a universe of issues, from the personal security of the individuals going overseas to the standards of conduct that we would expect them to exhibit while they're overseas. A good bit of this began actually under former Director Louis Freeh as we began to expand our overseas presence. With the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, we had a significant presence overseas at that time, which required, yet again, additional training added to that. As our overseas presence remains high, we see great benefit in maintaining that type of pre-deployment training for these individuals.
And final point on training, Ms. Leonhardt, does DEA have a program similar to the FBI in terms of pre-deployment training?
Yes, we do. It's called the Foreign Orientation Program. And in May of 2012, we were handing out the State Department cable prohibiting prostitution, even if it's legal in a country. We also added extra slides to a presentation that our OPR gives to all the employees and their spouses before they head overseas. And that includes information about prostitution, information about security clearances. So they are informed before they go overseas.
Okay, thank you. My time is up. Mr. Chairman, I just would like to pursue with you at some point this whole issue of training, because I think that has a great bearing on what was allowed to happen. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Now recognize the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Meadows, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Leonhardt, you've been with DEA for how many years?
35.
35 years, and as I understand it, about 5 years as in your current position from?
Since 2010.
Since 2010. So you take this very seriously, being part of law enforcement. I enjoy a great relationship with law enforcement back home, and the standards of which they take. And so standards that are violated by some within our ranks really paint a very bad picture for the rest who serve diligently. Wouldn't you agree with that?
Yes, these are, a few compared to the 4,600 agents that work for DEA. We're very proud of our agency, and this hits us hard.
Well, and it should hit you hard, and it sounds like that, you keep saying that you're appalled and that you just can't believe this kind of behavior. But my concern is in 1994, there was a GAO report that outlined, and you were there at that particular time, that outlined, sexual misconduct within the agency. Then again, in 2004, there was an OIG study that talked about the same kind of inappropriate behavior. And yet, here we are today with a new OIG report that's over 100 pages in length, But we're addressing a decade-old cultural problem, aren't we? This is not new to you. Is that correct?
This is new to me in this position, but in law enforcement, obviously, every company, every organization has some people that are not going to follow the rules. And to see what happened back in 2000 to 2003 in Colombia, to see what happened in 2009 with the incident with the agent in Bogota, and then to see Cartagena, this is our opportunity to make sure that that culture, if there was one that existed, that there's no doubt that employees know that this is unacceptable and see what will happen to them. That is why firing the 3 employees, agents after Cartagena sets the tone for what happens from here on.
Well, it might if it wasn't reinforced in other ways. And let me tell you, you keep coming back to Cartagena because it really may be the only time that there have been people that have actually been disciplined for improper conduct. Wouldn't you agree with that? So you keep running back to this as a good example, but yet your directive didn't come out until 2 years after that event. You were bragging about your directive that you sent out. Didn't that go out in 2014?
Yes, it went out as...
So why, if you were concerned about the culture, wouldn't it have gone out immediately after the event, or is it just that the press has started to report this as a problem and now it's a problem for you?
No, actually, we had discussion, the executive staff, on what things we should put in place. And we started putting things in place in 2012 after the discovery of what happened in Cartagena.
So is it your testimony that it took you 2 years to figure out what to put in a directive? Is that your testimony here today?
No, actually, we drafted that back after a working group got together to decide what steps should we immediately put in place. We drafted that, and on the heels of the Cartagena case, being able to show, here's what happens if you partake in this behavior. We had the disciplinary case finalized. We went out with a series of things. That memo, we had already put additional training, every basic agent training, every intel analyst training.
Okay, I'm running out of time, so let me do this one follow-up, because I have reason to believe that some of the people that today you're saying should have been fired, but that you didn't give a directive. But I have reason to believe that some of them have actually gotten promotions, have gotten bonuses, and have gotten new assignments. Would you agree with that?
I know
that some of them?
I know that a number of them were promoted between the activity in 2000 and when it came to light in 2010. I can tell you that since the allegations were raised and investigated, there have been no promotions.
How about bonuses? Because I have reason to believe that there were bonuses that were given. Yeah, I'm sure you've just looked into all of this, so were there bonuses given to some of those folks?
I know that there were bonuses given to the regional director. I don't know about bonuses given to the, I don't know about...
So some bonuses were given to people who were directly involved in this particular thing that most Americans find offensive.
The regional...
Yes or no?
No. The regional director was not...
Well, you said you just didn't know, so how would you know that?
No, the regional director that got bonuses was not directly involved in this. I don't know as to the other employees.
So is it possible they got bonuses?
It's very possible.
It's very possible, because our intel would say that it is. So here's I appreciate the patience of the chair. If you would give, without names, because obviously that is critical, would you agree today to give the names and the number of people involved in this to the OIG so he can report back to this committee on how many of those people got bonuses? Would you agree to do that? Because I find that that's reinforcing a bad behavior if they're getting bonuses. Would you do that? Would you agree to that?
I will work with the department who is going to be giving you additional information here shortly to see about adding that in.
So we can get bonus information to see if these people that were involved in this got bonuses. And you can redact the names. I just want to know the number of them.
So I'll discuss it with the department.
So is that a no?
No.
I mean, you're the administrator. You can make the decision. Are you going to give it to us or not?
If I'm able to give it to you, you'll get it.
Mr. Chairman.
If the general will yield.
Yes.
We're asking you to provide the information to the Inspector General. Will you or will you not do that?
If it was up to me to give it to you,
You're the administrator.
I'd give it to you.
You're the administrator. Who do you have to ask? Who do you report to?
The documents that are going to your committee
We're asking you to give them to the Inspector General.
If the Inspector General wants that, we'll give him it.
Does the Inspector General want that information?
I'd be happy to take that information and look into the issue.
Will the Inspector General report back to this committee at its earliest convenience about these particular individuals? And to suggest that the more senior person wasn't directly involved, he was involved, was he not?
He was not involved in the activity.
Did he properly report up the chain of command?
He didn't report it to the right place.
Okay, so he was involved in it. He may not have been naked having sex in his apartment like everybody else was, but he was involved, correct?
He failed to report to OPR.
That person should be included in the information that you give regarding bonuses and promotions. Now, can we also add into their promotions title changes? Bonuses, title changes, promotions. Is that fair?
Yes,
I'm looking for a yes here to the administrator.
We'll work to get you that information.
Is that a yes or no?
Yes, we'll get you that information.
Thank you. Gentlemen, have any other?
I thank the chair for their patience. I yield back.
Did you want to add something, Mr. Horowitz? It looked like you may have wanted to. Okay. Well, now recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, who is now recognized for 5 minutes.
One of the things that's a little bit frustrating about this hearing, and I apologize, but I feel a little bit sorry for you, is that you've expressed concerns about some of the civil service protections. And so people back home understand civil service protections are very important, because if we didn't have civil service protections, you could wind up in an agency like the IRS or something, firing anybody who wasn't on the right side politically. Nevertheless, you have expressed frustration, and I do believe some of the people who are expressing the greatest anger at you today, or some of the people who express anger at you, may be the first to fight any change in those civil service laws. But could you give us some suggestions that you may have to make it easier to remove an employee who is a misbehaving employee? I'll tell you one thing that frustrates me today, and you can think about this when I talk about it. We have a situation in which people are just behaving in outrageous conduct. I mean, something's just, you know, something, if a late-night talk show host made it up, you wouldn't believe it, but it really happened, apparently. So things that are obviously wrong. It makes me wonder what's happening if we just have employees who aren't doing a very good job at their job, right, where it's a little bit more subjective. But could you give me any suggestions you'd have for changing the civil service laws?
If you looked at giving us the same exemption as the FBI, I think that we then would be able to make sure that the penalties were appropriate.
And what would you think an appropriate penalty is for this behavior?
I think this is outrageous behavior, and that, knowing the facts of the case as I do, without having to be concerned with the appeal rights and being able to sustain it in a Merit System Protection Board, I believe that some of the behavior would raise to the level of removal.
By removal, you mean they should be fired?
just like Cartagena, yes.
Okay. Just because you kind of dance around, could you just describe to the public today why you feel this behavior was wrong? So I get a sense. Why is this bad behavior? Could you explain in your own mind?
It's wrong on a number of levels. Start with prostitution itself. You know, it's human trafficking is like the second highest illegal market besides drug trafficking. Look at all the efforts that the government has been putting into, especially in recent years, to go after the human trafficking threat. That's number one. Number two, it is so far away from the type of conduct and ethical behavior that is required of someone to carry a badge as a federal agent, that those are the reasons. And the security clearance issues, the security, putting people and our information at risk are all reasons that this is appalling.
It is appalling. When I read this stuff, is it right that some of this stuff was maybe brought to the attention or we were aware of by Colombian authorities? They were aware of this?
Actually, the Colombian authorities, by the time this was discovered on the corruption of the 2 police officers, the Colombian National Police did a great job in helping us convict them. And also, they removed a number of Colombian National Police officers who were involved in this same activity.
Okay. I'll ask the same question to Mr. Horowitz there because he seems a little. Could you comment on how you feel we should change, with still keeping protections for people, but change things a little bit so that we maybe had a little, not just outrageous conduct, but even competent conduct out of the DEA?
Well, within the current structure, there needs to be prompt reporting, prompt investigating, prompt disciplinary action, and follow-through. I mean, that's within the current structure. That can be done. You mentioned the Colombian National example. Those events that were learned about from the Colombian National officers who were corrupt and disclosed the information related to the 2001-2004 events. All of the DEA officials involved in those events down in Colombia said nothing about it. Think about it. It was learned 8 years, 6, 7, 8 years later when corrupt Colombian National officers disclosed it. That's a problem, a serious problem, that no one thought that that was reportable to headquarters and that there needed to be follow-through. Whether it's the current system, frankly, whether it's under an FBI regime, that was the fundamental flaw there, right? No one thought it was important enough or serious enough to raise to headquarters.
Well, it's good that the Colombian people had a little higher standards.
Well, these were the corrupt officers.
Right, but I mean, eventually that they felt there was something wrong.
Right, that they felt it was wrong, and once they, of course, got arrested, they were more than happy to come in and report out on what had occurred.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from Alabama, Mr. Palmer, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Leonhardt, is there any policy against turning over DEA weapons or communication devices to foreign agents or any non-DEA or non-U.S. official?
If I hear you right, you're asking about prohibition on turning over a device?
Not having immediate supervision of the weapons and devices that belong to an agent.
Well, number one, securing your weapon, that's required.
Now, I'm not asking you about that. I'm asking you, is there any policy at the DEA that would result in any kind of reprimand or punishment for not having immediate supervision of your weapons and communication devices? That's a yes or no.
It could fall under,
No, that's,
depending on the
it's
circumstances.
a yes or no. You either have
Yeah.
a penalty for not securing your weapon and your communications devices.
it
because
could-
there are things on those communication devices that could be used against other agents, against this country.
It could fall under poor judgment. There's a number of areas, there's policies on
Poor
securing.
judgment has already been.
securing
It's
information.
already been pointed out, poor judgment's not one of those official criteria. And what happened here, you talked about these corrupt police officers. Is it true that the same officers who helped facilitate these parties may have helped pay for the prostitutes, supervised, had control of the agent's weapons and communication devices, possibly the security, their badges, and is that also the case?
Part of the report is that while some of the agents were involved in that activity.
No, it's a
that
yes.
they're-
It's a yes or no.
Yes.
Okay. As egregious as the activity that the agents were involved in, which is in many respects a crime against humanity because of the ages of these girls, could you not find a reason to reprimand or fire agents for turning over their weapons and their communications devices to foreign nationals? I mean, for crying out loud, China is investing in South America and Latin America. They're going to spend another $250 billion over the next 10 years down there. Did it not occur to anyone that this might also be a national security breach or a problem along that line?
Someone doing a security adjudication could look at that and find that those are reasons why a security clearance should be suspended and revoked.
Were they for any of these people?
For the Bogota case, their clearances were never looked at.
Okay. Let me ask you this, and Mr. Chairman, you brought this up. Who is your immediate supervisor? Who do you report to? Who has the authority to hold you accountable for the oversight of the DEA?
The Deputy Attorney General.
Okay. Have you discussed this with the Deputy Attorney General and how to proceed with this?
I briefed the Deputy Attorney General on these cases recently.
Did he make any recommendations about how to proceed?
Yes. The security clearances are currently being reviewed by the Department of Justice.
I want to ask you something more specific. Did the Deputy Attorney General express any reservations about how the DEA has handled this? And in the discussions, was there any discussion about how to respond to the request from the Inspector General's office, Office of the Inspector General?
I've had multiple conversations with the DAG's office on turning over documents to the OIG, and they've given us good guidance on that.
So they gave you good guidance, so that means they approved of not turning over the documents that the Inspector General requested?
No, actually, we didn't know. We were worried about the victims' names and how to handle that.
Mr. Horowitz, you have said that there have been numerous instances where the FBI has failed to submit sufficient material to the office. You've mentioned it about the DEA. When you were here in January, you spoke of agencies, particularly the FBI and others, delaying production of material. I asked you then, did this rise to obstruction? You said it had a significant impact on reviews, but failed to go as far as calling it obstruction. I want to ask you that again. Are you willing to call it obstruction now?
What occurred back in 2013 when we were given redacted documents impeded and obstructed our ability to move forward with this investigation in a timely manner. And it took months, and it required me to elevate it to the leadership of both agencies, and it was when I elevated it that we got the reaction. But I didn't have to do that with ATF and the Marshal Service.
Right.
And I shouldn't have to do that. And I'm still having to do that in multiple instances.
I'm not trying to put you on the spot, but it appears to me that you've been obstructed.
Yep. I think in this instance we were obstructed.
Ms. Leon, is there still information that you'd like to get from the DEA?
I think at this point, we made a decision to simply move forward, issue the report, even though we had concerns about both the FBI and DEA's productions, because this was so important to put forward. And frankly, at this point, we've got other reports to do and get to that we still have the same issues on. Just different content.
Is there additional information you'd like to have, though?
On this issue, no.
Okay.
On others, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Now recognize the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Lynch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I'm not sure if the memo from Attorney General Holder has been admitted into evidence, but in case it hasn't, would you,
Without objection, so ordered.
Okay, great. Ms. Leonhardt and Mr. Horowitz, in the Attorney General's memo for all department personnel dated April 10th, 2015, subject prohibition on solicitation of prostitution. It says that the solicitation of prostitutes creates a greater demand for human trafficking victims and a consequent increase in the number of minors and adult persons trafficked into commercial sex slavery. Do you agree with that? Do you agree with that assessment?
I certainly think it raises the risks.
You agree with that?
I certainly do.
Yeah. Okay. And also in, you know, under the Department of Homeland Security regs and a couple of the statutes we have, what we're talking about here, the solicitation of prostitutes for 15 to 20 parties, is clearly within the definition of human trafficking. And yet the DEA is actually charged. I know that Mr. Farenthold and Mr. Gosar, myself, and Mr. Issa were down in Central America recently, and that's a big part of the DEA's mission, is really to combat human trafficking. And we actually give grants to the Department of, to the DEA and to the FBI and to State Department as part of the Trafficking Victims Protection Act and the Violence Against Women Act. We give grants to your agency to prevent human trafficking, prevent prostitution. And yet the very people, the very departments that are getting this money, in this case, are engaging in human trafficking. And it just brings me, you know, back to the unbelievability of what has happened here. It is really unbelievable. Under the Douglas factors that we use in determining discipline, one of the factors is the seriousness of the offense and whether the offense is in direct violation of the agency policy and the notoriety of the offense and whether that offense prohibits that individual from doing their job. So in this case, we have DEA agents that are still on the job that are receiving Federal grants to stop trafficking who have already engaged and admitted to trafficking. And I don't see the end of this. I don't see the end of this if we leave this situation the way it is. And so, Ms. Leonhardt, you know, I wouldn't believe this would be necessary, but we may need to amend Title V. We may have to put in a provision that says that holds you accountable. Because right now you could pass it off to somebody below you. You don't have to accept responsibility, and you haven't. And that's, you know, that's clear. But if we adopted an amendment to Title V that said outrageous and or criminal conduct in direct violation of an agency's mission would give you the ability to fire somebody, that would solve this, I think, in part. And also the failure to report, because that's where this has started, where the managers at the lower levels did not report, did not kick this up the chain of command. And so we need to hold them accountable too, and there should be a provision that says refusal or failure to report an offense like this will give the agency and the government the ability to claw back pensions, claw back salary that was accepted by those individuals who were violating the law. It's a shame that we have to get to this, but you know, I actually think that that may be where we're at right now. I'll yield back the balance of my time.
Thank the gentleman. I'm going to recognize myself. I do have a series of questions as we wrap up here. Administrator Leonhardt, you became you've tried to paint a picture. This was a decade ago. I've heard you say multiple times 10 years ago. When did you become the deputy administrator?
I was confirmed in March of 2004.
How many deputies are there, deputy administrators are there?
There's one.
So you were the sole deputy administrator, and then you became the acting administrator. When was that?
2007.
And then you were confirmed in 2010.
10.
So it's pretty safe to say that you've had your finger on the pulse of this department or this agency for more than a decade. Correct? You've been there 35 years, correct?
Either as the deputy or the acting administrator or administrator, yes, since 2004.
One of the things that you said that is troubling, and a long list, and was brought up by Mr. Lynch, is the idea that, and it was in response to some of the gentlemen over here who asked a question about those that were directly involved. I want you to seriously consider, I want all the departments and agencies to seriously consider, in my mind, they are directly involved if they fail to report. You may not have been the person who was directly, fully engaged in the inappropriate behavior, but once you know about it, you have a responsibility to deal with it under department policies, correct?
That's correct.
So when you suggest that they weren't directly involved, that offers me great concern. Do you understand that?
I do understand that. I was just making the point that he wasn't involved in the behavior. He failed to report, and that's what his shortcomings were.
Part of the abhorrent behavior is covering it up. That's the concern, and that's essentially what it is. It's covering it up by not reporting it up the chain because, as Mr. Horowitz pointed out, the only alternative based on the law enforcement component offense tables in Appendix 3 of sexual misconduct and sexual harassment is removal. It's the only one. There's no ifs, ands, or buts. There's no ambiguity. I know there are things that we're going to look at with Title V and whatnot, but removal is the only option. So let me ask you, Administrator, do you believe that soliciting prostitution is sexual harassment?
No, I believe that prostitution is sexual misconduct.
Explain the difference between sexual misconduct and sexual harassment.
Sexual harassment is a workplace behavior. It's sexual harassment is something that affects the employees in the workplace or an employee. Sexual misconduct is outside of the workplace, like prostitution. There's a difference. Does it affect the employee getting a raise? Does it affect an employee getting a transfer, getting a particular job? Is it a hostile work environment? Those are sexual harassment. Sexual misconduct is a different, you could have sexual misconduct that's also sexual harassment, but there is a difference. Prostitution would be sexual misconduct.
So explain to me then exactly what you believe, or explain to me what you think sexual harassment is. What would be some examples and what's sexual harassment?
unwelcome remarks, touching an employee, a supervisor touching an employee, a supervisor making threats about you're not going to get that promotion unless you do A, B, C, and D, those kinds of activities.
Mr. Horwitz, do you want to weigh in here? The difference between sexual harassment, sexual misconduct?
Well, I think it's based on what you have before you, which is what's written down as the definitions, and looking at the actions. Some of these, for example, one of the incidents that we cite talks about the assistant regional director making inappropriate sexual comments, forcing others to watch pornographic movies, yelling at employees, other kinds of actions, obviously clearly within the definition of
So with
sexual
those
harassment.
within the report, do you believe that those are sexual harassment? The
That's
administrator?
sexual harassment.
So if you're a DEA agent in this case, and you're having sex, commercial sex paid for, you don't believe that that's sexual harassment?
No, that's sexual misconduct.
Is procuring a prostitute sexual harassment?
It would be sexual misconduct. It didn't happen. It's
No
not the
harassment.
It's not the workplace.
It happened in government housing.
It's not behavior against a fellow, another employee.
So in your mind, in your world, which is a different planet than I live, it's not sexual harassment if you do something to somebody who's not a federal employee? What if they were here in the Washington, D.C., or you were in charge of Los Angeles field office? Is it sexual harassment if they go up to somebody in Los Angeles and start saying, you know, some ridiculous comments and trying to solicit somebody? That's just harassment? Or isn't? It's not in your world.
As it's defined for government, as it's defined by the EEO, in EEO terms, it's all workplace related.
So in the course of the workplace, somebody they're investigating, if they accept, if the federal employee accepts commercial sex, is that sexual harassment?
That's sexual misconduct.
We'll have to further explore this because I think we're getting to the heart of one of the biggest problems here, which is in your world, which I don't think is the real world. The charge here for the person in Bogota was improper association. Does that sound like the appropriate charge?
For which person in Bogota?
The DEA agent in Bogota in July of 2009 when they engaged. This is the case with the prostitute. They had a payment dispute. He throws a glass at a woman. A security guard sees this happening. There's no doubt about the facts according to your previous testimony. So that was not sexual harassment.
It's sexual misconduct.
Wow. And under sexual misconduct, do you think that improper association is one of the proper charges? Do you think this person was properly, I guess the word is charged? Based on that case and everything that you know, this person was suspended without pay for 14 days for conduct unbecoming and improper association. Do you believe that that was the proper charge for that person?
I believe those are two proper charges. The deciding official had a number of other charges that they could have looked at as well.
I'm asking what you personally believe. What do you believe they should have been charged with? Or do you believe that that was the proper conclusion?
I think it would be conduct unbecoming. It is improper association. I would have concerns about false statements, I have a number of concerns with those cases.
Any other, your professional opinion, your experience, you worked for the OPR, you've been at the agency for 30-plus years, you've been either the acting or the deputy or administrator for more than a decade. Do you believe that this person in Bogota was properly charged, or do you believe that they fell short? What else, if they did fall short, what else do you think they should have been charged with?
I do believe it fell short.
So what else should they have been charged with?
As I said, it's not so much the charge, it's the penalty. The other charges that could have been not.
The charge determines the penalty. And when you say that this person engaging with a prostitute, throwing a glass at her, I mean, how many things could we list out that are wrong with that in every step? And improper association is the one that they go with?
The penalty for improper association and conduct unbecoming can be removal.
And it was only 14 days. We even had an eyewitness. Security guard, worked for the federal government. Do you think any of these cases that we brought before you there should be additional charges?
Again, not knowing all the facts that the
You said you knew all the facts. You just issued a memo on March 26 saying that you had fully investigated this.
If I can.
It says, quote, these allegations were fully investigated by DEA, Office of Professional Responsibility. You sent this out at 5:33 p.m. on March 26, 2015.
Not knowing all the circumstances that the deciding officials, who are the only ones that can decide punishment in DEA, not knowing everything they took into consideration, they could have, by charging conduct unbecoming and improper association, the penalties are up to removal.
Mr. Horowitz, do you have a comment on this?
Well, I think the concern we found, as we cite in our report, is that they were charged with offenses such as conduct unbecoming, poor judgment, which, by the way, isn't the category, and others that were inconsistent. And the concern is, and we deal with this in our own agency when we have to look at individuals who may have engaged in misconduct, you want to charge what the number of charges should be, in part because there's precedent. You look to what prior individuals got for similarly situated conduct under similar charges. And so that's one of the concerns we have as we lay out here as to the importance of consistent charging and charging the appropriate offense.
To the Administrator, are you, is the DEA part of the intelligence community?
A sliver of DEA.
Sorry, your microphone.
A sliver of DEA is a part of the intelligence community.
Is it governed by the Intelligence Community Directive number 704?
That sliver of the agency is, yes.
Define that sliver, please.
Under 60 positions in DEA within the intelligence division.
Those that are serving overseas, would they be subject to this?
It depends on the position. There are in some countries some intelligence analysts that would be under that. The special agents would not.
Again, we're getting close to wrapping up, I promise. We're not at halftime. We're well past that. So walk me through security clearances. Who makes the determination who gets the security clearance, and who makes the decision as to whether or not it's revoked and when?
The same office that determines that a new employee gets a security clearance, that same office makes the determination.
What office is that?
Office of Security Programs. They do all adjudicating of security clearances for new employees, for contract employees, for anybody that's going to be in the workforce within DEA. This same office also handles periodic reinvestigations and handles reviews of people who already have security clearances. So, for instance, in the Cartagena case, OPR referred the case over to security programs when they had completed their investigation, and security programs did a complete review of their security clearances, adjudicated it, made a decision that there was enough to move to suspend the clearance, and then the agency moved for, because the person no longer has a security clearance, removal from service, because they can't be a DEA employee without having a security clearance.
So what are the standards by which you can have and not have a security clearance? Where is that standard?
There's a number of things they look at. The main thing is securing information, national security interest information. Does this person with their
Contact with a foreign national, allowed or not allowed? Unreported, I should say.
Not allowed if it's unreported, and there's rules for reporting.
Is there a document that determines, that governs what you will and will not give for security clearances?
There's a document that every employee is to fill out, an SF-86.
But it's just a couple of dudes down in the bowels of the DEA that just make a random decision, or how's this decision made?
No, they're trained on adjudication. They review if there's anything that is a red flag for them, like past
Sexual misconduct, a red flag?
sexual misconduct. If a person was disciplined, received any discipline, they, on their form, check it. Office of Security Programs does a review of that.
Has the Office of Security, have they ever revoked somebody's security clearance for people engaging in prostitution?
I don't know about prostitution. I know that they have revoked security clearances. So other than the three from Cartagena, I'm not sure.
You're just the administrator. Mr. Horowitz, have you looked into the security clearance possibilities?
We didn't look into what could have happened had they been referred to the Office of Security Programs, primarily because the concern we saw was that they weren't being referred to the Office of Security Programs. So we weren't in a position to review what actions they took with regard to these matters, because we learned that OPR, when they did finally get these allegations, never turned around and sent them to the OSP.
What do you say about that, Ms. Leonhardt?
That's one of the changes we've put in place.
When?
November of last year. We've never had, in the history of DEA, we've never had a formal mechanism for those security clearances to be reviewed upon an OPR investigation.
So you were the administrator, the deputy administrator, the acting administrator for almost 10 years at that point. You never had that policy in place? It seems like well, duh.
We never had a formal policy. It would be up to the Office of Professional Responsibility to flag an internal investigation that had security issues and then to refer that over to security programs. So we've set up a mechanism for that to happen automatically.
So were those recommendations made before or after the draft report from the Inspector General?
The recommendation that security programs, that Office of Professional Responsibility flag security violations and give them to security programs was happening long before that. What we did is, in Cartagena, made sure that the security clearances were reviewed, and then more recently in November set up a mechanism so that security programs and OPR have a mechanism to pass on a regular basis, security clearance is over.
That's just unbelievable to me. It just, you know, there's some things you just think, you just think this has to be happening. On the one hand, you got this problem. I mean, we've listed out the host. This is not one incident. I mean, we're going to have some people do something stupid somewhere. People are going to make mistakes. People are going to get themselves into trouble. I get this, but it was happening with such frequency. To not have that moved up the chain, for you to earlier not say, well, they weren't directly involved, you got to hold everybody accountable to get that thing all the way to the finish line. I just don't understand why you personally don't take a hand in that. Mr. Horowitz has referenced these made-up categories of offenses. Why did you make those up?
That's how employees for the last 40 years have been charged at DEA. So
never mind the guidelines. You just so we just keep doing it like we did 40 years ago. What?
part of charging by the Board of Conduct and by the deciding officials is to look at agency precedent and government precedent. And so the
problem, though, and again, we've exhausted this, we're getting to the end, is that this is a problem. You get called before this committee and say, oh, it's terrible, it's awful. But you personally have been responsible for this for more than a decade, and you didn't do anything about it. You may cry in the mirror, but I'm telling you, you were in a position to do it, and you didn't. And after Cartagena, that should have been a wake-up call, and it took you 2 years to get out a memo. 2 years, as Mr. Meadows brought up. We have a lot more that we need to go through. Mr. Horowitz, are there any other outstanding issues that you need help with from the department, the Drug Enforcement Agency?
With the Drug Enforcement Agency, no.
With the FBI?
We have, not as to this review, but as to at least 4 other ongoing reviews, we still do not have all the records that we need because of the FBI's continuing process of reviewing records, determining what it is allowed under its legal judgment to provide to us, go through that process, go to the Attorney General or the Deputy Attorney General, get their approval, and then get it to us. So as to several ongoing reviews, we still do not have all the materials that are responsive to our requests.
So, Mr. Perkins, why does the FBI think that they're so special and don't have to adhere to the law and don't do what the other agencies are doing within the Department of Justice?
Mr. Chairman, we are adhering to the law. I take exception with the Inspector General's comments along those lines. Let me tell you, sir, there are, in his latest letter dated yesterday, section is 218 letters, we refer to them, there were 5 investigations noted. The records that they wish to receive that are being delayed involve email. We have turned over 35,000 emails to them. There are 200 emails in question out of 35,000 that we are working with them to go through. We believe in the rule of law. We have a legal disagreement with the Inspector General.
Mr. Horowitz?
Can I be clear? They're not working with us to get us the 200 emails. They haven't given us the 200 emails. Our understanding is it's because they believe they have a legal review to conduct. That's why what our understanding is as to why we're not getting them. For several of these matters, these are multi-months we've been waiting for them. There is no reason why we should not be getting the materials immediately. None whatsoever. I understand they have a legal position that is different. Frankly, the easiest way to resolve this, and I think on this we're in complete agreement, is if the Office of Legal Counsel would simply issue its opinion, I think we would both say we would be very satisfied.
And how long has this been pending at the OLC?
Well, May will be the 1-year anniversary.
I concur with the Inspector General. We will follow the OLC opinion to the letter.
Why are you different than the other departments and agencies within the Department of Justice?
I can't speak for the other agencies, Mr. Chairman. What I can speak for is matters involving Rule 6E, matters involving the Financial Privacy Act, and other matters that we strongly believe we have a legal responsibility to review and provide then to the Inspector General.
What are you not willing to share with the Inspector General?
There's any number of series of items, as I mentioned, for instance, Rule 6E material. There's certain aspects from...
Explain that so people can understand.
I'm sorry,
Yeah,
yes. 6E of the Rules of Criminal Procedure, the secrecy rules involving grand jury information.
But you'd given that to him previously.
Once matters have been reviewed, once matters are...
No, but it had been a long-standing practice of the FBI to provide the Inspector General this material, correct?
I can't speak to that, sir.
You can't speak to the history of the FBI document production? That's why you're here.
Yes, sir. We provide the information once there has been a legal review that we determine legally that we are on solid ground to provide the information.
But that's a change, correct? What was it before, Mr. Horowitz?
Pre-2010, there was no such objection from the FBI as to wiretap information, Fair Credit Reporting Act information, grand jury information. We got that material. In fact, in a 1998 and 1999 proceedings in district court in Oklahoma, the Department itself took the position that we were entitled to grand jury material, and 2 Federal judges agreed. This is all changed since 2010 with no change in the law. The only thing, frankly, that occurred was several hard-hitting OIG reviews about how the FBI was handling some of its national security authorities. Other than that, nothing changed in 2010.
And Mr. Perkins, that's the concern from this committee. You know, we have hundreds of people working for the Inspector General's office there in the Department of Justice, intended to be the fair arbiters who can get in and look under the hood and see and ferret out these problems. And quite frankly, the reason that the DEA and the FBI are here today is they're the problem children. We've cited several times that ATF and marshals and others, this is not a problem. It's not an issue. Now, they got problems in the department within their agencies. Don't get me wrong. They've got things they got to clean up, and we're going to work with them on that. But the reason you're sitting here today in the hearing, and I know we were very focused on the DEA, but the 2 agencies, the FBI as well as the DEA, are impeding the ability to understand and unearth what the problems are.
Mr. Chairman, let me clarify. There's an apples and oranges issue here. With regard to this particular report that we're here today for, there are process issues within the FBI that the Deputy Director has made changes that the Inspector General is aware of, and those changes in our business process will eliminate these types of holdups.
All of them?
For these types of records, not having to do with the other issues that he brings up in 218. We are waiting, as the Inspector General said, if OLC would render their opinion, we will march forward and abide by it 100%.
And I would just add on that, I think we would both take any opinion at this point, good or bad, because this is ongoing. We completely disagree on the legal issue, and certainly we've questioned why all of a sudden in 2010.
And this is why, again, we're wrapping up. I got hours of questions on this, but we are going to wrap up here pretty quick. This act, the Inspector General Act, authorizes, quote, to have access to all records, reports, audits, reviews, documents, papers, recommendations, and other material available to the applicable establishment which relate to the programs and operations with respect to which that Inspector General has responsibilities under this Act. Doesn't sound ambiguous. Doesn't sound like and there was no change in the law. It's just in 2010, after the Inspector General was unearthing a lot of very difficult things for the agency, they just decided, we're going to change the rules. We're going to change the rules. I'm not suggesting, Mr. Perkins, that you personally did that. But the consequence is, we have hundreds of people at the Inspector General's office who can't do their job. And you, the FBI, are standing in their way. And the DEA is standing in their way. We're going to keep yanking you up here time after time after time if we have to. You know, I'm fortunate enough to become the chairman of this committee. The very first hearing we had is on this. And I can promise you, we will continue to yank you up here as long as this continues to be a problem. The act is clear. The Inspector General is to have unfettered access to all records, not just the ones you want to choose from. This idea that an OLC opinion is just pending and it's going on for close to a year is just intolerable. And there's not a prevailing attitude within the FBI or the DEA that believes that the Inspector General work is of value to those departments and agencies. Otherwise, they would want them to come in and help clear their good name or ferret out problems and work to fix it. See, in this nation, we're different. We are self-critical. I can't have this type of hearing in another nation. I probably couldn't go to Colombia and do this type of hearing. But you can in the United States. But it requires good people to allow somebody to come in and check and look under the hood, which is what the Inspector General is supposed to do. We've had a long hearing. I appreciate your patience. We need your help and cooperation moving forward. Again, to the thousands of men and women who serve in these departments and agencies, I cannot thank them enough for putting their lives on the line. My grandfather was a career FBI agent. I care about the agency.
Thank you, sir.
Okay? I care about law enforcement in this nation. But we're going to do it the right way. We're going to do it the right way. And allowing sexual harassment or misconduct to get a little slap on the wrist with 2 to 14 days paid leave is not acceptable. It wasn't then, it isn't now, and it shouldn't be moving forward. We're going to look towards other things we can do within law to give future administrators and directors more latitude. And to the Inspector General, I thank you for this report. We wouldn't have known about it without your good work and the good people in your agency and so we thank you, and this hearing stands adjourned.